The radiator in the corner of the warehouse office always began its morning cycle with a sound like a small hammer striking a wet pipe. Clank, clank, hiss. Leo did not look up from the green screen terminal. His fingers, permanently grayed around the cuticles from hydraulic oil, moved across the mechanical keyboard with a rhythmic, heavy click. It was 5:42 a.m. The air in the office tasted of stale filter coffee, damp concrete, and the faint, sweet chemical tang of the degreaser the night shift used to mop the loading bays. Behind him, the fluorescent tube overhead flickered twice, a brief orange glow at the electrodes, before dying back into its low 50-cycle hum. Leo reached for his mug. The tea was lukewarm, a skin of evaporated milk forming a pale crescent against the chipped ceramic. He drank it anyway, his throat dry from the dust of 300 pallets of imported copper fittings that had arrived from the port at midnight. A heavy, double-beat thud echoed from the bay doors. It was the sound of a passenger door on a late-model German sedan slamming shut. Not the sliding rattle of the delivery vans, but the thick, pressurized seal of luxury. Marcus was early, or late, depending on which day of his weekend had just bled into Tuesday morning. When the glass door of the office swung open, the scent of expensive sandalwood cologne cut through the wet cardboard smell of the warehouse. Marcus didn't close the door behind him. He let the draft from the unheated corridor rush in, rustling the yellowing delivery receipts pinned to the corkboard. "Leo," Marcus said. He didn't look at Leo. His eyes were fixed on the screen of his phone as his thumb flicked upward. His silk tie was slightly askew, the knot loosened by exactly half an inch, his signature look for operational oversight. "The shipment from Keeler Logistics, is it cleared?" "The customs manifest is missing the third-party transit certificate," Leo said. His voice was quiet, gravelly from the morning cold. "The container is sitting on Bay 4. We can't unload it until the Port Authority releases the digital seal." Marcus stopped scrolling. He let out a long, slow breath through his nose, a sound of profound, patient exhaustion. He finally looked up, his gaze stopping somewhere near Leo's left collarbone. "We're paying $400 a day in demurrage on that box, Leo. Just sign the internal release. Let the boys strip it." "If we break the seal without the customs clerk's digital sign-off, the port fines the corporation $30,000, Leo said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point his finger. He simply rested his hands flat on the edge of the metal desk. The steel was cold enough to ache against his palms. "The fine goes to the operating license, not the shipping broker." Marcus stepped closer. The leather of his handmade brogue squeaked on the grit-dusted linoleum. He reached out, his hand hovering over the stack of printed manifests on Leo's desk, before his fingers settled on a silver pen Leo had received for 5 years of service. He began to click it. Click, clack, click, clack. "Julian spoke to the commissioner's assistant at the charity dinner on Saturday," Marcus said, his tone dropping into that warm, paternal register he used when he was about to ask for something illegal or incredibly tedious. "It's handled, Leo. The digital seal is a formality. We have 40 tons of copper that need to be in the manufacturing pipeline by 9. Sign the internal." Leo looked at the silver pen in Marcus's hand. The chrome plating was already peeling near the clip. In his mind, Leo ran the calculation. If he refused, Marcus would spend 20 minutes lecturing him on synergy and family skin in the game. Then Julian would arrive around 8, smelling of peppermint and laundry detergent, and perform the good cop routine, offering to buy Leo a breakfast sandwich he would eventually forget to order. They would waste 2 hours of his shift. The morning inventory would fall behind. The dispatch logs for the noon trucks would be late. and Leo would end up staying until 9 tonight anyway to manually enter the serial numbers. The energy required to resist was 12 units. The energy required to sign, document the discrepancy in his private hardback ledger, and let the storm hit Marcus's desk when the Port Authority did their Friday audit was 3 units. He reached out his hand. Marcus, without breaking his rhythm of clicking, dropped the pen into Leo's open palm. "Good lad," Marcus murmured, already looking back at his phone. "Julian's bringing some people from the regional bank through at 10. Make sure the floor near the chemical cage looks less like a grease pit. Put some sawdust down." "The chemical cage has a slow leak in the drum of trichloroethylene," Leo said. "Sawdust is a fire hazard with chlorinated solvents." "Just make it look clean, Leo," Marcus said, his voice dropping any pretense of warmth as he turned toward the inner office. "We need the line of credit extended by Friday. Don't be difficult." The inner office door shut with a solid, expensive click. Leo sat in the silence of the warehouse. Through the small, wire-reinforced glass window of his office, he could see the dark expanse of the main floor. The towering racks of steel and copper stretched into the shadows, 20 feet high, silent and cold. He pulled his private black notebook from the middle drawer of his desk, the one that locked with a key he kept on his personal brass ring. He opened it to page 42. In neat draftman's print he wrote, "November 14th, 5:50 a.m., container KL9082, seal broken without customs form 8B, instruction given by M. Vance, refused to provide written variants." He closed the notebook, turned the brass key in the drawer lock, and slid the key into his pocket. From the main floor, the heavy pneumatic groan of a forklift engine cranked over. The night shift driver, probably tired and blind from 10 hours of halogen glare, was starting his run. Leo picked up the internal release form. He signed his name at the bottom, not his full signature, but the small, illegible scribble he used for things that didn't belong to him. The damp clay of the oil absorbent swept across the concrete with a dry, sweeping hiss. Leo worked the heavy push broom in long, deliberate strokes. He had ignored Marcus's directive about the sawdust. Instead, he had gone to the maintenance shed and hauled out a 50-pound bag of gray bentonite clay. It was heavier, harder on his lower back, and smelled of wet earth and industrial lime, but it wouldn't ignite if a forklift battery sparked near the chemical cage. A shadow broke the orange glare of the high-pressure sodium lights near the loading bay entrance. Julian walked in, holding a white paper box from the bakery down the street. He was wearing his gray window-pane suit, the one with the soft shoulders that made him look approachable but expensive. Unlike Marcus, who walked with a heavy, heel-first strike, Julian moved silently, his thin-soled Italian loafers gliding over the concrete dust. "Tell me you didn't sign for that Keeler box," Julian said, his voice smooth, carrying the manufactured warmth of a man who spent his afternoons buying lunch for supply chain directors. Leo didn't stop sweeping. He pushed the mound of gray clay another 3 feet, leaving a pale, clean path through the dark grease of the floor. "I signed the internal release." Marcus took the sheet. Julian stopped 5 feet away. He didn't like the dust. He looked down at his shoes, then back at Leo, a small, pained smile hovering at the corners of his mouth. "Damn it. Marcus is so short-sighted. We needed that cargo held in bond for another 48 hours. The quarterly audit for the credit line is Thursday, Leo. If that inventory is on our books today, it changes our cash-to-asset ratio." The container is already half unloaded, Leo said. He leaned his weight against the broom handle, the rough wood grain pressing into the calluses of his palm. Forklift 3 is pulling the third tier now. Can we put it back? Julian asked. It was a serious question. He asked it with a straight face, his eyes wide and sincere, as if 30 tons of industrial copper could be easily slid back into a steel box and resealed with a piece of tape. Just for 2 days. Tell the dock crew there was a paperwork error. Tell them the customs seal was damaged. The customs seal was broken, Leo said. Marcus told me to break it. Julian sighed, a soft, whistling sound through his teeth. He stepped closer and set the bakery box down on the greasy hood of a dead battery charging station. The white cardboard instantly absorbed a dark, translucent circle of grease from the metal surface. You should have called me, Leo. You know how Marcus gets when his personal accounts are tight. He doesn't see the macro picture. You're the operational guy. You're supposed to be the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper. Leo looked at the greasy circle spreading on the white pastry box. The grease had reached the red-inked logo of the bakery. If he had called Julian at 6 in the morning, Julian's phone would have been on silent. If he had refused to sign, both brothers would have spent the morning tag-teaming him in the small office, their voices rising over the hum of the heater, explaining that his stubbornness was threatening the family legacy. They had done it 3 times last winter. I do the logs, Julian, Leo said quietly. I don't do the macro picture. We're a team, Leo, a 3-legged stool, Julian said, his voice taking on that gentle, rhythmic cadence. He reached into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out a key ring. Look, I need a massive favor. The bank reps are arriving at 10. The Mercedes has a smudge on the passenger door. Looks like grease from the loading dock gate. And I left my iPad on the dining table at the house. Can you take my car, run back to my place, grab the iPad, and run it through the automatic wash on the boulevard? Leo looked at the keys dangling from Julian's manicured finger. The silver star of the key fob caught the orange light from the rafters. The morning dispatch is short-staffed, Leo said. Jerry called in sick. I have to verify the cargo manifests for the 9:30 outbound trucks. Marcus can do that, Julian said easily. He reached out and slipped the key ring onto the wooden handle of Leo's broom, where it slid down and clattered against the metal bracket. Or let the drivers wait. It's 30 minutes, Leo. Max. I'd go myself, but I have to prep the boardroom. We've got the regional VP coming. If we don't get this extension, we don't pay the suppliers next month. You want to get paid, don't you? It was delivered with a laugh. A light, teasing nudge between brothers. But the undercurrent was cold. It was the same threat they used when the warehouse heaters broke and they refused to hire a technician. We're all in this boat together, Leo. If you don't bail the water, we all drown. Except Leo was the only one with wet feet. Leo looked down at the keys resting against the dusty metal of the broom. In his mind, the grid of the morning operations shifted. If he left now, the 9:30 trucks would miss their slot at the interstate terminal. The shipping broker, a man named Henderson who had been with their father's original firm for 20 years, would get an automated delay notice. Henderson hated delays. He had 3 other logistics firms begging for his business. If Leo went, the delay would cost Vance & Sons approximately $4,000 in late delivery penalties. It would show up on the weekly automated report that went directly to the external board members, the ones who were beginning to wonder why the operational costs were rising while the brothers' travel expenses doubled. Keys are on the broom, Leo said. Thanks, kiddo, Julian said. He patted Leo's shoulder. His hand was warm, his palm soft and dry. He picked up the grease-stained pastry box, opened the lid, and offered it. Take a bear claw. Seriously, you look like you haven't eaten since yesterday. The pastry was cold, the white icing cracked and yellowed at the edges. "I'm fine," Leo said. Julian shrugged, took one himself, and walked back toward the office, his loafers making no sound at all on the concrete. He left the greasy pastry box on the battery charger, the lid wide open, letting the warehouse dust settle over the remaining sweet rolls. Leo leaned his broom against the chemical cage. He picked up the Mercedes keys. They were heavy, encased in a leather sleeve that smelled of new car and lavender. He didn't run. He walked slowly toward the exit, his heavy work boots dragging slightly on the concrete, leaving a faint, dark trail of boot prints through the fresh gray clay. The driver's seat of Julian's Mercedes was upholstered in a pale, perforated leather that smelled faintly of heated plastics and expensive pomade. When Leo sat down, his heavy canvas work jacket, greased at the elbows and stiff with dried salt from winter road spray, made a sharp, sticky sound against the clean hide. He adjusted the mirror. His own reflection looked gray, his eyes ringed with the bruised shadows of a man who hadn't slept past 4 in the morning since the busy season started in September. He started the engine. The dashboard came alive with a soft, blue-white luminescence, a dozen digital dials sweeping silently into place. It was a stark contrast to the rattling diesel forklifts on the floor. On the passenger seat lay a chaotic nest of Julian's daily life. There was a crumpled paper bag from an organic juice bar, 3 dry cleaning receipts for silk-lined suits, and a folded cream envelope from Apex Commercial Bank. At a red light, Leo reached over. His rough, split-skinned index finger traced the edge of the envelope. It wasn't sealed. It was a formal notice of overdraft protection termination on the Vance & Sons operations payroll account, dated 4 days ago. We regret to inform you that the temporary line of $500,000 will not be extended past the current cycle without physical collateral verification. Physical collateral. That meant the copper. The very shipment Marcus had just ordered Leo to illegally release from customs bond so they could stack it in Bay 4 before the bank representatives arrived at 10. Leo folded the letter back exactly as it had been. He laid it back on top of the dry cleaning receipts. The turn signal blinked with a muted, rhythmic tick, 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 a quiet sound that seemed to mock the industrial din he had left behind. He drove toward the affluent suburb where Julian lived, a neighborhood of manicured lawns, tall privacy hedges, and houses built of gray stone that looked like small, modern fortresses. Here, the only sound was the distant, polite clack-clack of a lawn sprinkler and the low hum of a garbage truck 3 streets over. At Julian's house, the air smelled of cut grass and cedar mulch. Leo didn't use the front door. He used the side garage keypad, entering the code he had memorized 3 years ago when he was asked to paint Julian's deck while the brothers were in Cabo. The house was cold, the air conditioning set to a crisp 68 degrees. It felt dead. The kitchen island of white quartz was immaculate, save for a single, dark blue iPad resting next to a half-empty glass of green liquid that had separated into layers of sediment and cloudy water. Leo picked up the tablet. The screen lit up with notifications. 3 missed calls from Marcus, a text from Julian's wife about a deposit for a riding school, and an automated alert from the warehouse's primary shipping broker, Henderson. Leo tapped the Henderson alert. Because his fingerprint wasn't registered, the screen demanded a passcode, but the preview text was visible on the lock screen. Vance Logistics, outbound load number 412, Detroit Freight, missed the 9 a.m. gate, cargo not manifested, demurrage penalties applied, Henderson Logistics reserving right to reallocate afternoon tractors. It was 9:14 a.m. The cargo wasn't manifested because Leo was currently standing in Julian's kitchen, holding a piece of aluminum and glass while his brothers prepared to tell a regional bank vice president that Vance & Sons was a well-oiled machine. Marcus had his own login for the shipping portal. He had the same authority to press the 3 digital buttons required to authorize the Detroit manifest. But Marcus hadn't touched a logistics terminal since 2018. To Marcus, the portal was a black box that Leo handled. Leo's personal phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. It was Marcus. Leo didn't answer. He set his phone to silent, slid it back into his pocket, and stood in the quiet of his brother's kitchen for a full minute, listening to the high-pitched, almost imperceptible whistle of the stainless steel refrigerator. He didn't rush. He walked back to the garage, closed the door behind him with a soft, secure click, and got back into the Mercedes. On the way back to the industrial park, he pulled into the automated car wash on the corner of the boulevard. It was a cheap, $5 wash, the kind that used giant spinning brushes made of thick blue felt. Leo sat in the dark interior of the car as the vehicle was pulled forward by the undercarriage track. The heavy, wet thud of the blue brushes began to batter the windshield. Thick, pink soap cascaded down the glass, blocking out the daylight, turning the cabin into a dim, neon-lit cave. The smell of cheap cherry wax drifted through the air vents. His phone buzzed again in his lap. Marcus's name lit up the screen. Then it stopped, and Julian's name appeared. Leo watched the soap slide down the side window. He calculated the time. If he returned now, it would take him 20 minutes to clear the Detroit manifest, but the truck would still be late. The driver would have missed his log hours, and the freight broker would pull their preferred status by noon. The bank reps would arrive just as the terminal yard was in a deadlock. If he stayed in the car wash, let the wax cycle finish, and drove back at exactly 50 miles per hour, he would arrive at 9:55 a.m., 5 minutes before the bank meeting. He adjusted the climate control, turning the fan down so he could hear the steady, heavy roar of the water jets stripping the road grime from his brother's car. He closed his eyes. For the first time in 6 months, his shoulders didn't feel like they were being pressed down by a sheet of lead. He let the machinery do the work. The wet Mercedes rolled into the gravel lot of Vance & Sons at exactly 9:54 a.m. The heat rising from the engine bay created a thin, shaking haze of steam that curled around the pristine chrome grille. The gravel, gray and oily from decades of leaking semi-truck engines, crunched beneath the clean, black tires. In the center of the yard, the Detroit freight truck, a blue Kenworth with a rusted sleeper cab, was parked diagonally across the main gate. Its engine was still idling, a deep, rhythmic rattle that shook the metal window frames of the main office. Billows of gray diesel smoke drifted toward the brick facade, smelling of burnt oil and cold winter air. Marcus was standing near the truck's driver's side door. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie fluttering over his shoulder in the draft from the truck's radiator fan. He was shouting over the engine noise, waving a yellow manifest sheet at the driver, who was leaning out of his cab window with his arm resting on the door, looking down at Marcus with bored indifference. Leo turned off the ignition. The quiet of the Mercedes cabin returned instantly. He didn't get out right away. He waited until the digital clock on the dashboard clicked to 9:55 a.m. Then he picked up the blue iPad, grabbed the heavy leather keyring, and opened the door. The cold, diesel-soaked air of the yard hit him immediately, stripping away the artificial cherry scent of the car wash. Julian emerged from the main office door just as Leo stepped onto the gravel. Behind Julian were 2 men in dark, identical wool overcoats, the regional representatives from Apex Commercial. They were middle-aged, clean-shaven, and carried thin leather portfolios under their arms. They looked at the idling Kenworth blocking the gate, then at the gray mud puddle they would have to cross to reach the warehouse entrance.
Leo,
Julian said, his voice rising in pitch as he hurried over. He reached out and snatched the iPad from Leo's hand before Leo could even offer it. He didn't look at the wet, clean Mercedes. "Where have you been? We've been calling you for 20 minutes." "The car wash had a queue," Leo said. His voice was flat, even. He didn't offer an apology. "The Detroit truck hasn't cleared," Julian hissed under his breath, turning his back slightly to the bank representatives so they couldn't see his jaw clench. "Marcus is out there making a scene. Why didn't you release the gate log before you left?" "You told me to take your car," Leo said. "The keys were on my broom." Julian's mouth opened slightly, then closed. He looked down at the iPad in his hands, then at the bank reps, who were now watching them with polite, guarded curiosity. "Right. Yes. Well, go help Marcus, now." Leo didn't run. He walked toward the idling truck, his work boots sinking into the wet gravel. As he approached, the truck driver, a regular named Miller, who had a tattoo of a faded anchor on his forearm, spotted him. Miller's posture changed immediately. He sat up, ignoring Marcus entirely, and leaned further out the window. "Leo," Miller called out, his voice easily cutting through the rumble of the engine. "This suit says I'm late. I've been sitting here since 8:40. The gate computer says my manifest is locked in pending status by the corporate office. I missed my slot in Detroit, and my dispatcher is billing you guys for a dry run." "It's a glitch, Miller," Marcus said, his face red, a thin sheen of sweat visible on his forehead despite the 50-degree weather. He turned to Leo, his eyes wide with a mixture of anger and panic. "Leo, tell him. It's an IT issue. Tell him you're going to manually override the gate clearance right now." Leo looked at Marcus. He looked at the yellow manifest sheet in Marcus's hand, which was damp from the misting rain that had just begun to fall. He calculated the energy. If he explained to Miller that the manifest was locked because Julian wanted to delay entering the copper inventory onto the active ledger to manipulate the bank audit, Marcus would erupt. It would happen right in front of the Apex commercial representatives. The scene would be messy, loud, and useless. Marcus would deny it, call Leo incompetent, and spend the next week cutting Leo's operational budget to punish him. Instead, Leo looked up at Miller. "The system is pending because the third-party transit certificate for the Keeler shipment hasn't cleared customs yet," Leo said. He spoke clearly, his voice steady enough for the bank representatives to hear if they were listening. "The gate locks automatically when there's an unresolved discrepancy on a linked container." Marcus froze. The yellow paper in his hand trembled slightly. That's not the same line, Leo. The Detroit truck has nothing to do with the Keeler box." "The system uses a single operational license," Leo said, his eyes meeting Marcus's with a cold, blank neutrality. "When one shipment is flagged for a customs violation, the entire portal goes into a temporary hold. I told you that at 5:40 this morning." A heavy silence fell over the gravel yard, broken only by the steady, deep vibration of the Kenworth's engine. Behind them, the taller of the two bank representatives, a man with graying temples and a sharp, legalistic set to his jaw, took a step forward. He didn't look at Marcus, he looked at Leo. "Is the Keeler shipment currently in the yard?" the representative asked. Marcus turned around quickly, his professional smile snapping back onto his face like a mask. "Mr. Sterling, please. This is just standard morning friction. Our logistics coordinator here, my younger brother Leo, sometimes gets a bit technical with the municipal codes. We're fully authorized. If you'll follow Julian inside, we have the ledger sheets ready for your review." Mr. Sterling didn't move. He kept his eyes on Leo. The physical collateral we are verifying today is the 40 tons of copper grade A cathodes from Keeler. Are they currently unloaded, or are they still under customs hold? Leo felt Marcus's gaze drilling into the side of his face. He felt the cold moisture of the rain beginning to settle on his eyelashes. In his pocket, his hand closed around the small brass keyring that held the key to his locked desk drawer, and the black notebook containing the physical log of Marcus's instruction to break the customs seal. "They're on Bay 4, Leo said quietly. "Being unloaded now." Mr. Sterling looked at the Kenworth blocking the gate, then back to the office corridor. "Then let's start the physical audit on Bay 4, he said. The side metal door of the warehouse didn't close easily. It had to be lifted by the brass handle and slammed until the deadbolt clicked into the rusted frame. Leo did it with a practiced, heavy jerk of his shoulder, the cold steel of the door sending a dull vibration up his arm. Inside, the warehouse was a cavern of concrete and iron. The air was 5 degrees colder than it was outside, trapped beneath 30-foot ceilings where the industrial insulation hung in yellowing, torn blankets. The only light came from the high sodium vapor lamps, which cast a pale, jaundiced glow over the towering stacks of inventory. "Our capacity is up 20% year over year," Marcus said, his voice echoing loudly in the vast space. He walked slightly ahead of the bank representatives, his hands gesturing toward the upper racks. "We've optimized the vertical storage. That's what Julian's new logistics algorithm did for us, streamlined everything." Mr. Sterling didn't look at the upper racks. He walked with his hands deep in his overcoat pockets, his leather soles clicking sharply on the concrete. The younger representative, a man named Vance, no relation, who carried the leather portfolio, was looking at a dark, greasy trail on the floor where a forklift had leaked hydraulic fluid 3 days ago. "The algorithm," Mr. Sterling said, his voice quiet but clear enough to cut through the distant whine of a pneumatic tool. "And yet, we have a 40-ton shipment currently sitting in a bay without a customs release." "As I said, a minor technical delay," Julian chimed in, stepping up to Sterling's side. He had already tucked his iPad under his arm, his fingers tapping a nervous, silent rhythm against the screen cover. "The port's digital gateway has been lagging all morning. It's a regional issue. We're in constant contact with the broker." Leo walked 3 paces behind them. He didn't look at his brothers. He kept his eyes on the floor, watching for the small cracks in the concrete that he had memorized over 10 years of walking this floor. At rack 12, where the shadow of the structural steel columns cut off the overhead light, Julian slowed his pace. He let Marcus and the 2 bank representatives move ahead toward Bay 4. With a quick, silent movement, Julian grabbed Leo's canvas sleeve. His fingers were tight, digging into the heavy fabric near Leo's forearm. "Leo," Julian whispered, his breath smelling of the mint he had chewed to hide the smell of the bakery pastry. "Listen to me. When we get to the bay, the clipboard is going to have the green customs tag missing. I need you to tell Sterling that the port officer did a verbal release over the phone because of the digital lag. Tell him the physical tag was discarded by the dock crew during the initial strip." Leo stopped walking. Julian's hand stayed on his sleeve. In the dim light of the aisle, Julian's face looked thin, the skin tight over his cheekbones. The charm was gone. In its place was the raw, desperate panic of a man who knew his mortgage payment depended on the signature of the man in the wool overcoat 30 feet ahead of them. "If I say there was a verbal release, they'll ask for the officer's badge number," Leo said. His voice was lower than Julian's whisper, a quiet, solid weight. "They verify those with the port registry within 24 hours. "We'll get the number by then," Julian hissed, his fingers tightening on Leo's jacket. "Marcus is calling the broker's cousin now. We just need to get through the walkthrough today. If Sterling red flags this audit, the line of credit is frozen on Monday. The payroll check for the warehouse crew won't clear, Leo. Your crew. Think about them. Your crew. It was the old lever. Whenever the brothers made a mistake, when they bought the luxury company cars instead of upgrading the safety harnesses, or when they took a 2-week retreat to Scottsdale while the heating main was cracked, they framed the consequences as Leo's burden. Think of the boys on the floor, Leo. Think of their families. Leo looked down at Julian's hand. The gold watch on his wrist, a gift to himself for their record third quarter last year, gleamed in the pale light. Leo calculated the energy. If he lied, he would have to create a false entry in the terminal log. He would have to invent a name, a badge number, and a time of call. When the bank's compliance department verified the audit, his signature would be the one on the digital log. The brothers would say they had no idea. They would say they trusted their operational head to handle the compliance details. He would be the one standing in front of the state licensing board. The energy required to carry their lie was infinite. It would require months of sleepless nights, of watching the mail, of waiting for the phone to ring. The energy required to tell the truth was zero. He only had to do nothing. He only had to let the physical reality of the warehouse speak for itself. "The bank representatives are waiting," Leo said. He didn't pull his arm away. He simply stepped forward, and Julian, realizing the grip was useless, let his fingers slip off the canvas. They reached Bay 4. The blue Kenworth's trailer was backed flush against the dock seal, but the metal roll-up door of the warehouse was open, letting in a bitter draft of wet wind. On the concrete floor of the dock stood 6 massive wooden pallets, each holding 2-ton stacks of bright, reddish-orange copper sheets. They looked like giant, heavy books with pages of solid metal. A green plastic seal, cut cleanly in two, lay on the edge of the supervisor's small, high-top desk near the dock. The steel cable that had secured the lock was frayed at the ends where the heavy-duty bolt cutters had bitten through. Mr. Sterling walked straight to the supervisor's desk. He didn't look at the copper. He looked at the broken green plastic. He reached out with 2 fingers, turned the larger piece over, and read the serial number stamped into the plastic. Seal number 098-KL, Mr. Sterling read aloud. He looked over his shoulder at Marcus. This is the seal listed on the bond manifest. It was cut less than an hour ago. Marcus cleared his throat. His hand went to his tie, then to his pocket. Yes, well, as I said, the digital release was verbal. We had to get the cargo off the truck to keep the lanes clear. Leo has the verification log on his terminal. Mr. Sterling turned his gaze to Leo. The younger representative, Vance, opened his leather portfolio and pulled out a blue pen, holding it ready over a blank sheet of grid paper. "Leo," Mr. Sterling said, "do you have the digital release code from the Port Authority?" Leo reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out his phone. He didn't pull out the brass keyring. He pulled out a small yellow piece of paper, the gate receipt that Miller, the truck driver, had handed him when he entered the yard. "The gate log shows the truck arrived at 8:40, Leo said. His voice was steady, filling the cold space between the racks. "The manifest was locked by the corporate office at 8:45. There is no digital release code in the system." Julian let out a short, sharp breath that sounded like a cough. Marcus didn't move. His face had gone from red to a pale, flat gray, the color of the wet gravel outside. "I see," Mr. Sterling said. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely unsurprised, like a man who had seen 50 small family businesses collapse in exactly the same way. He turned to Vance. "Mark the Keeler inventory as unverified and non-collateralized. We'll suspend the physical verification of the remaining bays until the compliance team reviews the gate logs." The sound of the rain on the warehouse's corrugated tin roof was not a gentle patter. It was a dense, metallic roar that filled the high rafters, drowning out the low-frequency hum of the city outside. Mr. Sterling and the younger representative did not say goodbye. They walked out through the loading bay, their wool coats pulled tight around their necks, stepping carefully over the wet gravel to their waiting sedan. Julian followed them to the glass door of the office, his posture stiff, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets as he watched their brake lights disappear into the gray mist of the industrial park. When the door clicked shut, the silence in the office became heavy, almost physical. Leo sat back down at his desk. His joints felt stiff from the hours spent standing on the cold concrete of Bay 4. He reached for his black ballpoint pen, pulled the stack of delivery receipts toward him, and began his daily noon reconciliation. Date, carrier, manifest number, seal status. In the inner office, the door slammed so hard the dry-mounted frame groaned. "What the hell was that, Julian?" Marcus's voice, muffled by the thin drywall, was high and strained. "You said you had the auditor prepped. You said Sterling was your guy." "He was my guy until your brilliant idea to cut the customs seal before the digital release cleared," Julian shot back, his smooth, practiced tone entirely gone, replaced by a sharp, nasal panic. "Do you have any idea what an uncollateralized audit does to our risk profile? They're going to freeze the operational account by Friday." "We have 30 tons of copper on the floor," Marcus yelled. "It's physical metal. How is that not collateral?" "Because we don't legally own it until the customs duty is paid, you idiot. To the bank, it's smuggled goods until the port releases the bond." Leo didn't look up from his desk. His hand was steady as he wrote. "Carrier, Detroit Intermodal. Status, delayed. Reason, administrative hold." He knew the drywall was only half an inch thick. The partition had been put up by their father 20 years ago to separate the sales office from the logistics desk. It had no sound insulation. Every word, every creak of their leather chairs drifted straight to Leo's ears. He made an internal calculation. The company's primary operating account at Apex Commercial had a balance of $11,412 as of 9 this morning. The weekly payroll for the 7 warehouse workers and 3 drivers was $12,800. If the line of credit was frozen, the payroll checks would bounce on Friday afternoon. Marcus and Julian had their personal draws set to automatic transfer on the 1st of every month. They had already taken their $30,000 each for November. They were empty. "We need a scapegoat," Marcus said. His voice had dropped, the shouting turning into a low, hurried mutter that vibrated through the wall. "If the board gets the audit report, they're going to look at the corporate expenditures. They're going to look at the lease on the Mercedes. They're going to look at the travel expenses from the Miami Distributor Conference." "We can't bury those," Julian said. "The receipts are in the system." "The receipts are entered by the logistics coordinator," Marcus said. A long pause followed. The only sound in the office was the hum of the old refrigerator in the corner and the heavy, rhythmic drumming of the rain. Leo's pen paused over the paper. He didn't freeze. His heart didn't race. He simply felt a cold, familiar clarity settle over his chest. It was the same clarity he felt when a pallet tipped over on the dock, the instant mental calculation of weight, trajectory, and the safest place to step to avoid being crushed. They were going to blame the customs violation on him. They would tell the board that Leo had cut the seal without authorization due to operational negligence, and that his failure to maintain the compliance logs had triggered the audit freeze. It was a neat, professional execution. It would give them 30 days to restructure the loan while the board investigated the logistics department. Leo slid his hand into his trousers pocket. His fingers brushed against the small, cold metal of his personal USB drive, the one he used to back up the shipping database every Tuesday afternoon. He reached down, plugged the drive into the side of the ancient terminal, and began a quiet, manual copy of the client list, the historical freight rates, and the encrypted operational access codes for the 3 major regional distributors who generated 80% of Vance & Sons' revenue. The progress bar on the green screen began to fill. 12%. 24%. Indirectly, through the frosted glass of the inner office door, Leo saw Marcus's shadow stand up. The shadow paced back and forth, the gold-rimmed glasses catching the dim yellow light from the hallway. "We'll write up a formal warning," Marcus muttered through the wall. "Backdate it to last month. Say he's been having performance issues. That way, when we present it to the board, there's a paper trail. We tell them we're letting him go to clean up the operations." "Will he sign it?" Julian asked. "He'll sign it," Marcus said, his voice returning to that dismissive, casual confidence. "Where else is he going to go? He's 32, he doesn't have a degree, and he's spent 10 years breathing diesel fumes in this dump. He needs this job more than we do." 56%. 68%. On the desk, next to Leo's elbow, sat a platter of dry cold cuts that Julian had ordered from the deli for the bank lunch. It had been sitting there for 3 hours. The roast beef had turned a dark, iridescent purple at the edges. The Swiss cheese was yellowed and curled. Leo reached out, picked up a single piece of dry bread from the edge of the platter, and chewed it slowly. It tasted like nothing. 89%. 100%. The terminal screen blinked. Transfer complete. Leo didn't eject the drive immediately. He left it in the slot, his hand resting on the plastic housing, waiting. He heard the door handle of the inner office rattle. He pulled the drive out, slipped it into his pocket, and went back to writing. Date: November 14th. Carrier: Detroit Intermodal. Status: log closed. The rain had finally died down to a freezing, listless drizzle, leaving only the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of a rusted gutter directly outside the office window. Leo worked the heavy cast-iron 2-hole punch on his desk. Clink, chunk. The metal handle was cold, its return spring squeaking with a dry metallic protest each time he pressed down. He gathered 24 shipping manifests from the morning, aligned their edges against the worn plastic guide, and punched them. Clink, chunk. The paper circles fell into the plastic tray below like gray snow. From the inner office, the door opened. A wave of artificial vanilla fragrance drifted out first. Julian had sprayed a commercial air freshener to cover the smell of his nervous sweat. Marcus followed him out. He had put his suit jacket back on, though he hadn't retied his tie. He was holding a single sheet of pale blue paper, his fingers lightly tapping against the edge as he walked toward Leo's desk. "Leo," Marcus said, his voice flat, stripped of the booming confidence he had used with the bank representatives. He stopped at the corner of the metal desk, his eyes focusing on the wall calendar behind Leo's head rather than on Leo himself. "We're doing some administrative cleanup. With the new logistics guidelines from the state, we need to formalize the operational chain." He laid the blue sheet of paper on top of the newly punched manifests. Leo didn't touch it. He looked at the document. The heading read, Vance & Sons, Distribution, Standard Operating Procedure Update, Customs and Bond Compliance. It looked like a standard corporate memo, the kind Julian drafted when he wanted to sound like an MBA. But Leo's eyes went straight to the third paragraph, where the typeface was slightly smaller and more densely packed. Section 3.2. The Logistics Coordinator shall maintain sole physical custody of all customs seals, manifests, and verification logs. By signing below, the Logistics Coordinator acknowledges full, retroactive responsibility for the execution of all bond clearances and compliance verifications for the fiscal year. Retroactive responsibility. If he signed this, any investigation into the broken customs seal on Bay 4 or the previous 5 shipments Julian had delayed to manipulate their monthly inventory balances would end at Leo's desk. It would be a legal confession, signed and dated by his own hand. It's just a formality, Julian said. He was standing near the door to the warehouse corridor, his hands tucked into his pockets, his shoulder leaning against the doorframe in an attempt to look casual. The bank reps wanted to see that we have a defined compliance officer. Since you're the one who actually handles the dock, it makes sense to have your name on the protocol. Leo reached out and adjusted the alignment guide on the hole puncher. His hand was steady, his skin rough and gray against the black iron of the tool. He made an internal calculation. If he refused outright, Marcus would lose his temper. The argument would escalate into a screaming match about loyalty and everything we've sacrificed for you. Marcus would threaten to fire him on the spot. If Leo was fired today, his access to the terminal would be cut off immediately, and he wouldn't be able to secure the rest of the operational logs or clear his personal items from the warehouse locker. But if he signed it, the trap would shut. The brothers would have their paper trail. They would submit the signed memo to the Apex Commercial Compliance Board tomorrow morning to prove they had disciplined the negligent party and resolved the internal audit failure. The language in Section 3.2 references the State Shipping Registry Guidelines, Leo said. His voice was low, devoid of emotion, like a pre-recorded weather report. The state registry updated their bond protocol 3 weeks ago. I need to verify that this template aligns with the new definitions before I sign it. Marcus's fingers twitched against his trousers. Leo, it's a standard template. Julian got it from the corporate legal service. There's nothing to verify. The legal service doesn't track local port variances, Leo said. He picked up another stack of manifests, aligned them, and brought the iron handle down. Clink-chunk. If the state finds a variance during the Friday audit, a signed, non-compliant document carries a double penalty. I'll check the registry databases tonight after the evening trucks leave. I'll have it on your desk by 6 tomorrow morning. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but Julian caught his eye from the doorway. Julian gave a tiny, nearly imperceptible shake of his head. He knew Leo. He knew that when Leo became pedantic about codes, pushing him only resulted in a stubborn, silent wall of resistance. To Julian, Leo's request sounded like the typical, slow-witted caution of a clerk who couldn't move without checking a manual first. Fine, Julian said, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual oily warmth. 6 a.m., Leo. Don't forget. We need to fax the compliance updates to the bank's regional office before their 10 o'clock board meeting. It's critical. I'll have it ready, Leo said. Marcus stared at Leo for a second longer, his jaw working as if he wanted to spit something out. But he ultimately turned and walked back into his office, slamming the door behind him. Julian stayed in the doorway for another moment. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small silver tin of mints, and popped one into his mouth. The sharp, artificial smell of wintergreen briefly fought the vanilla air freshener. "We're just trying to keep the lights on, Leo," Julian said quietly, his tone dripping with a soft, manipulative sincerity. "We're all on the same team here. Remember that." Leo didn't look up from his papers. "I remember." Julian lingered, perhaps waiting for some sign of reassurance, some confirmation that the youngest brother was still the reliable, silent beast of burden he had always been. When Leo didn't move, Julian turned and went back to his desk. Leo waited until the latch of Julian's door clicked. He picked up the blue piece of paper. He didn't crumple it. He folded it neatly into thirds, slid it into the inside pocket of his canvas work jacket, and picked up his pen. On his desk, the small pile of gray paper circles from the hole puncher sat in the plastic tray. Leo reached out, took a pinch of the paper dust between his thumb and forefinger, and let it drift slowly back into the tray, watching the tiny circles settle over one another like ash. The warehouse at 6:15 p.m. was a hollow, cold shell. The morning shift had gone home at 5, and the 3 remaining yard drivers had already punched out, leaving their grease-stained clipboards on the counter of the dispatch office. The only sound left was the slow, rhythmic clink-tick-clink of the metal transformers on the overhead high-pressure sodium lights as they slowly cooled, section by section, turning the vast concrete floor into a grid of long, heavy shadows. Leo walked the perimeter of the floor. It was his evening routine, a physical chore he had done every day for 10 years. He stopped at the heavy chain for the roll-up door of Bay 4. The iron links of the chain were thick, coated in a black, sticky mixture of lithium grease and road dust. He wrapped his hand around the chain, his bare skin instantly taking on the cold, oily smear of the metal, and hauled down with his body weight. With a roaring metallic rattle that echoed from the 30-foot ceiling, the heavy steel door slid down its vertical tracks, shutting out the wet gravel yard and the gray, foggy evening. He dropped the iron latch into the floor slot and slid the master lock through the bracket, snapping it shut with a solid, flat click. His personal phone buzzed in his canvas jacket pocket. Leo pulled his hand away from the greasy lock, wiped his palm on the side of his trousers, and looked at the screen. The caller ID showed Mitchell Foundry, Frank Mitchell. Frank Mitchell was their oldest and largest client. His foundry in northern Indiana took 40 tons of copper and zinc alloys every week. The Mitchell account was the foundation upon which their father had built the business. It represented nearly 34% of Vance & Sons' annual shipping volume. Leo answered. "This is Leo." "Leo." Frank's voice came through the speaker, gravelly and tired, accompanied by the background roar of his foundry's induction furnaces. "I'm looking at my receiving schedule for tomorrow morning. I've got 3 flatbeds scheduled to pick up the copper sheets from the Keeler container, and my dispatcher says the electronic booking sheet just went blank. I called Julian's line, and his assistant told me there was a minor software transition at the terminal. What's going on?" Leo stood in the shadow of the closed Bay 4 door. The smell of wet iron and damp concrete was thick here, rising from the floor like cold steam. He made an internal calculation. If he repeated Julian's lie about a software transition, Frank would believe him for 12 hours. But by noon tomorrow, when the flatbeds arrived at the yard and found the container still locked by customs, Frank would realize he had been deceived. He would have to idle his furnaces, costing Mitchell Foundry $60,000 a day in lost production. He would never forgive Vance & Sons. If Leo told him the truth, Frank would pull his business by 9 tomorrow morning. He would route his shipping contract to Atlas Logistics, their primary regional competitor. Without the Mitchell contract, the corporate value of Vance & Sons would drop by half within 30 days. The brothers wouldn't be able to pay the lease on their executive suites, let alone the interest on the primary bank loan. "The software is running, Frank," Leo said, his voice quiet and even, carrying no trace of hesitation. "The Keeler container has been placed on a compliance hold by the Port Authority. It won't be cleared for release tomorrow morning." On the other end of the line, the background roar of the furnaces seemed to fade as Frank moved into a quieter office. "A compliance hold? The customs seal?" "Yes," Leo said. "Jesus Christ," Frank muttered, a long, low whistle of disbelief passing through the phone. "Marcus told me last month that you guys had a gold star rating with the customs district. He said there was zero risk of a border delay on this batch." "The physical seal was cut before the digital clearance code was issued," Leo said simply, presenting the raw operational fact without adding any color or blame. The Port Authority flagged the license. "Who cut the seal?" Frank asked. The tone of his voice had changed from irritation to a cold, hard curiosity. He was a veteran of the industrial sector. He knew that a broken customs seal wasn't a clerical error. It was a desperate shortcut. Leo looked down at his boots, which were still dark and damp from the wet gravel yard. "The instruction was issued by corporate," Leo said. A heavy silence lingered on the line. Frank Mitchell knew the Vance family. He had known their father, and he knew Marcus and Julian. He knew which brother spent his days in a heated office looking at lease agreements, and which brother actually loaded the trucks at 5 in the morning. "Are they trying to pin this on you, Leo?" Frank asked quietly. Leo didn't answer the question directly. "The compliance memo is on my desk. They want me to sign it by 6 tomorrow morning." "Don't sign it," Frank said. His voice was sharp now, the authority of a man who ran a 500-person plant. "If you sign that, you're the fall guy. The Port Authority will put your name on the federal blacklist, Leo. You'll never work in logistics again." "I know," Leo said. "Listen to me," Frank said, his tone dropping to a low, intense murmur. "I've got a meeting with the board of Atlas Logistics on Thursday. If I move my freight to them, I need an operations manager who knows my specs. I don't trust Julian, and Marcus couldn't find his way around a loading dock with a map. If you're out, I'm out. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Leo felt a cold, quiet pressure behind his eyes. It was the alignment of the weight, the trajectory of the fall. "I understand, Frank," Leo said. "Keep your head down," Frank said. "Don't sign anything. I'll have my legal counsel look at the carrier contract tonight. We have a standard 60-day escape clause for operational negligence. A federal customs hold qualifies." "Thank you, Frank," Leo said. "Take care of yourself, kid," Frank said, and the line went dead. Leo slowly lowered the phone. He stood in the dark aisle of Rack 12, the silence of the warehouse returning, deeper and colder than before. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his black notebook. He didn't write anything new. He just stared at the page where he had recorded Marcus's instruction to break the seal. He had the client database. He had the operational codes. And now he had the largest account in the region, ready to walk out the door the moment he gave the signal. He put the notebook back in his jacket, walked slowly toward the small office, and began to pack the contents of his desk drawer into his old canvas backpack. The padlock on Leo's personal locker was a brass Yale model that had belonged to his father. The brass was dull, oxidized to a deep, dark greenish brown, but the internal tumblers still aligned with a soft, oily slide when the key was turned. Clack. Leo pulled the lock free and swung the gray steel door open. The thin metal door gave a hollow, metallic shutter that rattled against the adjacent lockers. Inside, The space was a ledger of his 10 years in this corner of the building. There was a spare pair of work boots with worn-down soles, a faded blue flannel shirt smelling of laundry detergent and diesel exhaust, and an old ceramic mug with V&S Logistics printed on the side in cracked, peeling letters. At the very back of the top shelf lay a small, heavy object wrapped in a piece of oiled flannel. Leo unwrapped it. It was a brass caliper tool, another relic from his father's days as an active toolmaker before he bought the distribution yard. Unlike Marcus's gold-plated pens or Julian's designer watches, the caliper was a tool of absolute precision. Its jaws were still sharp, its vernier scale engraved so finely that it required the yellow overhead light to read the markings. The brothers had discarded their father's old workshop tools when they took over the corporate office, dumping them into a cardboard box meant for the scrap metal bin. Leo had quietly retrieved the caliper. He placed the tool carefully at the bottom of his canvas backpack, wrapping it in the faded flannel shirt. He added the mug. The boots he left. They were molded to his feet, but they were caked in the grease of the Vance & Sons floor, and he did not want to carry that smell into whatever room he stood in next. He zipped the backpack. The heavy brass zipper made a long, biting sound in the silent office. Before he left, Leo walked toward the copy room to turn off the main power strip for the industrial laser printer. The room was small, cramped between the server rack and the cleaning supply closet, smelling of warm toner, ozone, and pine cleaner. As he reached for the power switch on the wall, his eye caught a single sheet of paper lying face down in the black plastic recycling bin beside the machine. The paper was clean, white, and uncreased, not the usual crumpled scrap or delivery duplicate. Leo picked it up and turned it over. It was a test print from Marcus's network terminal, sent at 1:14 p.m. today. The header bore the corporate digital stamp of the Board of Directors. Confidential Memorandum. To Executive Committee, Vance & Sons Distribution. From Marcus Vance, CEO, Julian Vance, COO. Date, November 17, 2026. Subject, Operational Restructuring and Immediate Termination of L. Vance. Leo read the text slowly, his eyes moving across the lines with the same detached, clinical focus he used to scan customs manifests. Following an internal audit of our logistics division, the executive team has identified a pattern of operational negligence and compliance failures under the supervision of the logistics coordinator, Leo Vance. Specifically, the unauthorized breach of a federal customs seal on container KL9082 has resulted in a temporary administrative hold by the Port Authority. To protect the financial integrity of the corporation and restore our credit line with Apex Commercial, the board is advised that L. Vance will be terminated for gross misconduct, effective Friday, November 17th at 4 p.m. His operational access will be revoked immediately upon his departure from the facility. Friday, November 17th, 4 p.m. Today was Tuesday. Leo made an internal calculation. The busiest days of the shipping week were Wednesday and Thursday, when the regional metal distributors ran their heavy outbound schedules to beat the weekend manufacturing closures. If the brothers fired him today, the yard would descend into absolute chaos by 9 tomorrow morning. Marcus didn't know how to generate the digital routing keys, and Julian couldn't run the dispatch desk for 20 minutes without dropping half the bookings. They needed him. They needed him to work through the high-volume rush, to clear the backlog, to organize the yard, and to make sure the trucks rolled out on schedule. They wanted him to do the grueling, invisible labor of keeping the company alive for 3 more days, only to hand him his termination papers at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, right as the weekend began. They had planned the timing perfectly to minimize their own inconvenience. Leo laid the paper back into the recycling bin, placing it face down, exactly as he had found it. He felt no anger. The sensation was more like the cold, physical satisfaction of watching a puzzle slide into its final, logical alignment. The brothers had always viewed his labor as a natural resource, like the water from the tap or the electricity in the wires. They expected it to flow constantly, without maintenance, until they chose to cut the line. He turned off the copy room light. He walked back to his desk, took his heavy canvas work jacket from the back of his chair, and slid his arms into the sleeves. He hoisted his backpack onto his shoulder. He didn't leave a note. He didn't lock his desk drawer. He left the blue compliance memo, the one Marcus wanted him to sign by 6 in the morning, sitting right in the center of the green screen terminal's keyboard, held down by a heavy steel nut he had found on the floor of Bay 4. He stepped out of the office. Outside, the freezing drizzle had turned into a thick, low-lying fog that swallowed the yellow streetlights of the industrial park. Leo walked to his 20-year-old pickup truck, his boots crunching softly on the wet gravel. He started the engine. The old V8 block rumbled, a deep, uneven vibration that shook the rust-pocked fenders. He turned on the headlights, the twin beams of pale yellow cutting through the mist, illuminating the dark, silent facade of the warehouse he had spent a third of his life protecting. He put the truck in gear and drove toward the gate. The cold water from the break room tap was so frigid it made the bones in Leo's wrists ache as he rinsed the glass coffee carafe. He didn't use soap. There was only a crusty, dried-out bottle of yellow dish liquid on the rusted metal sink edge, and the smell of artificial lemon was too loud for 5 in the morning. Instead, he rubbed the brown stain on the bottom of the glass with his bare thumb until the glass squeaked under the friction. He filled the machine, poured the cheap, pre-ground Robusta into the paper filter, and flipped the red toggle. Within a minute, the old heating element began its familiar wheezing rattle. Hiss, gurgle, pop. A thin, bitter steam rose from the basket, smelling of burnt plastic and stale beans. It was Wednesday, November 15th, 5:32 a.m. Leo walked back to his desk. The blue compliance memo was exactly where he had left it the night before, still flattened under the heavy steel nut in the center of his keyboard. He sat down, pulled his black notebook from his backpack, and laid it next to his keyboard. He did not open it. He simply let his fingers rest on the textured vinyl cover, feeling the coldness of the pages through the cardboard. At 6:42 a.m., the heavy glass door of the office rattled. Marcus walked in. He was wearing his black cashmere overcoat, but he hadn't shaved. The dark stubble along his jawline made him look 10 years older, and his collar was crumpled under his coat. He didn't look at the warehouse door or check the yard log. He walked straight to Leo's desk. His eyes fell on the blue sheet of paper. He saw the steel nut resting on the blank signature line. Marcus took a deep, shaky breath, his nostrils flaring. He didn't raise his voice, not yet, but the tone was tight, vibrating with an unstable, dry heat. "Leo, it's 6:40. Why isn't this signed?" Leo didn't look up from his terminal screen, where the morning dispatch queue was slowly loading line by line. The retroactive liability clause in Section 3.2 is non-compliant with our primary carrier's insurance policy. Marcus took a step closer, his leather coat whispering against the metal edge of the filing cabinet. "What are you talking about? The carrier insurance has nothing to do with the internal customs log." "It does," Leo said, his voice flat, rhythmic, and quiet. Under Section 9 of the Great Midwest Underwriting Agreement, any retroactive transfer of compliance responsibility to an unlicensed coordinator void rates the cargo transit insurance for the preceding 90 days. If I sign this today, Our carrier insurance for the entire regional fleet is nullified retroactively." Marcus stared at him, his mouth slightly open, his eyes blinking rapidly. To Marcus, insurance was a monthly bill he authorized Julian to pay. He had never read a policy page in his life. He didn't know if Section 9 existed or if Leo was simply reading Latin to him. But the phrase, nullified retroactively, was a physical blow. If the transit insurance was voided, they couldn't legally run a single flatbed across the state line without risking $1 million liability. That's a clerical technicality," Marcus stammered, his fingers catching on the lapel of his coat. "We can get a rider. Julian can call the agent and get a waiver." "The agent is with Great Midwest," Leo said. "They are the subsidiary of Apex Commercial, the same bank that ran the audit yesterday. If Julian calls them to ask for a retroactive compliance waiver, the bank's fraud division will freeze the primary operating account before noon." Leo turned his head slowly, looking Marcus directly in the eyes. His face was blank, his expression completely devoid of defiance or fear. He looked like an accountant explaining an amortization table to a client who had forgotten how to add. "Do you want me to call Julian's agent?" Leo asked. Marcus's hand dropped from his coat. He looked at the blue paper, then at Leo, then at the steel nut. The silence in the office was complete, save for the slow, heavy drip, drip, drip of the condensation on the window pane. Marcus was trapped in the cold reality of his own ignorance. He wanted to scream. He wanted to grab the paper, shove it in Leo's face, and demand his signature. But the word fraud had a weight that even his arrogance couldn't lift. "No," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking slightly. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "No, don't call the agent." "I've drafted a revised version," Leo said, his fingers returning to his keyboard. He tapped 3 keys, and the dot matrix printer in the corner began its high-pitched, metallic squeal, feeding a clean white sheet of tractor feed paper through the rollers. It removes the retroactive clause but maintains the forward-looking compliance tracking. It protects the carrier policy while satisfying the bank's formatting requirements. "Will the bank accept it?" Marcus asked, his voice hollow, his eyes following the movement of the paper through the printer. "They'll accept it for the 48-hour review window," Leo said. "It buys us until Friday afternoon." Friday afternoon, the exact hour of the planned termination. Marcus let out a long, slow breath through his nose. The relief was visible in the way his shoulders dropped, the tension leaving his neck. He looked at Leo, a faint, patronizing smirk trying to claw its way back onto his face. "See?" Marcus said, his voice regaining a fraction of its usual volume. "This is why we keep you around, Leo. You're the details guy. You just have to look at the big picture sometimes. We're trying to save the business." "I understand," Leo said. The printer finished its run with a sharp zip clack. Leo reached over, tore the clean white page along the perforated edge, and laid it on his desk. He didn't sign it. He laid the pen beside it, the silver barrel reflecting the pale yellow light of the terminal screen. "I'll sign the revision as soon as Julian confirms the board has approved the forward-looking language," Leo said. "We don't want another variance on the record." Marcus nodded quickly, his mind already drifting back to the executive suite, to the coffee he hadn't drank, to the calls he had to make to their creditors. "Right. Good. I'll get Julian on it. Have it ready by tonight, Leo." "I'll have it ready," Leo said. Marcus turned and walked back to the inner office, his shoes squeaking loudly on the clean linoleum. Leo watched the shadow of his brother disappear behind the frosted glass door. He didn't pick up the pen. He reached down, opened his backpack, and slid the blank, printed revision into his black notebook. It was Wednesday morning. The first shift drivers were beginning to arrive in the yard, their heavy diesel trucks coughing into life, their headlights cutting through the cold fog outside his window. The Cold War was over. The silent preparation had begun. The keycaps of the old mechanical keyboard came off with a series of sharp, dry snaps. Leo used the flat edge of a small brass ruler to pop them loose, starting with the outer function keys and working his way toward the center. Underneath the plastic caps, the steel plate was choked with 10 years of industrial sediment. Pale gray concrete dust from the warehouse floor, tiny flakes of dried tobacco from his father's old pipe, and the thin, yellowed grease of 1,000 midday sandwiches. He dipped an old, stiff-bristled toothbrush into a small glass jar of isopropyl alcohol. The sharp medical sting of the solvent instantly cut through the stale coffee smell of the office, cold and antiseptic. He began to scrub. Scritch, scritch, scritch. He worked with absolute, focused deliberation, cleaning each individual plastic switch housing, wiping the gray sludge onto a rag of torn t-shirt. His fingers were steady, his movements small and precise. This was his silent preparation. The office was quiet. Julian was out, supposedly attending a solidarity lunch with a prospective carrier partner, though Leo knew the calendar entry was just a cover for Julian to meet his personal accountant. Marcus was in his office, the low, rhythmic murmur of his voice filtering through the drywall as he pleaded with another supplier for a 48-hour extension on an outstanding invoice. Leo finished cleaning the Enter key switch. He blew on the metal plate, the alcohol evaporating in a fraction of a second, leaving the steel clean, gray, and cold. He reached into his backpack and pulled out 3 items. The first was a copy of the gate receipt from Tuesday morning, showing the Kenworth's exact arrival time. The second was a high-resolution color photocopy of the broken green customs seal 098-KL, the numbers sharp and clear against the dark concrete background where it had been cut. The third was a clean, typed statement of fact, not a complaint, not an emotional grievance, but a chronological timeline of Tuesday's events, concluding with Marcus's verbal directive to bypass the port registry. He did not use corporate letterhead. He used plain 70-pound white paper. At the bottom of the statement, he signed his name. Next to his signature, he wrote his official payroll title, Logistics Coordinator, Non-Executive. He slid the 3 sheets of paper into a heavy, waterproof Tyvek envelope. Using a black felt-tip marker, he wrote the destination address on the center of the envelope. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Office of Field Operations, Port Director, Federal Building, Plaza, Suite 400, Downtown District. He sealed the adhesive strip of the envelope, pressing it down with the flat of his hand until the blue plastic seal was bonded completely to the fibers. At 2:15 p.m., the glass door of the office opened with its usual rattle. Sarah, the regular mail carrier for the industrial park, walked in. She was a quiet woman in her 50s, her blue uniform jacket damp from the fog that still lingered over the gravel lot. She carried a small bundle of promotional flyers and a single utility bill for the warehouse water main. "Afternoon, Leo," she said, setting the bundle on the edge of his desk. Her eyes lingered for a fraction of a second on the disassembled keyboard, but she didn't ask. In this park, she saw stranger things every week. "Afternoon, Sarah," Leo said. He reached out and handed her the heavy Tyvek envelope. "I need this registered. Special delivery. Priority handling." Sarah took the envelope, feeling its weight. She pulled her electronic terminal from her belt, scanned the barcode sticker she pulled from her pocket, and slapped it onto the center of the Tyvek. "Needs a signature on the other end?" "Yes," Leo said, "the port director's clerk." "You got it. It'll be downtown by 9 tomorrow morning," she said, her thumb tapping the screen to confirm the transaction. She handed Leo the small white tracking slip. "Quiet day?" "Just cleaning up," Leo said. Sarah gave a brief, tired nod, turned, and let the heavy glass door swing shut behind her. Leo watched through the window as she walked back to her white delivery truck, her boots splashing through the shallow puddles in the gravel. The truck engine started with a puff of gray exhaust, and she rolled out through the main gate. He made an internal calculation. The envelope would arrive at the Federal Building at 9 a.m. on Thursday, November 16th. Under Federal Maritime Code, a registered notification of a broken customs seal, accompanied by physical photographic evidence of the mutilated seal, required an immediate, on-site verification within 24 hours of receipt. The verification team would not call ahead. They would not schedule an appointment. They would arrive at the Vance & Sons yard on Friday, November 17th, between 10 a.m. and noon. By Friday at noon, Marcus's planned termination of Leo's contract would be exactly 4 hours away. But Leo's resignation letter, the one he was drafting in his mind now, would be delivered to Julian's desk at 8 a.m. that same morning, accompanied by Frank Mitchell's 60-day cancellation notice for the Mitchell Foundry shipping contract. When the federal agents walked through the gate demanding to see the compliance authority, they would find only Marcus and Julian. The brothers, who had signed the corporate registry as CEO and COO, would have to explain the cut seal, the missing digital clearance, and the altered gate logs on their own. Leo would be gone. His terminal password would be deleted, his keys would be on the desk, and his grandfather's brass caliper would be in his backpack at his kitchen table. He picked up the first keycap, the A key, and aligned it over the clean gray switch housing. He pressed down until it clicked back into place with a sharp, solid sound. Snap. He picked up the next one. The heavy, leather-bound daily truck register closed with a dull, dust-puffing thump. Leo smoothed his hand over the cracked black grain of the cover. It was a massive book, 4 inches thick, where every single vehicle that had entered or exited the Vance & Sons yard for the last 5 years was recorded in blue ink. His handwriting, neat, blocky, and completely consistent, filled page after page, column after column. He picked up his pen and signed the very bottom of the entry for Wednesday, November 15th. L. Vance, Coordinator, Yard secure at 1700. The glass door of the office rattled, and Julian walked in. The cold air of the evening rushed in behind him, but it was immediately overtaken by the heavy, rich scent of garlic, rosemary, and dry red wine. Julian's cashmere scarf was slightly loose, his cheeks flushed with the warm, expensive glow of a 3-hour steakhouse lunch. He carried a leather portfolio tucked under his arm, and his car keys dangled from his index finger, making a soft, melodic clink, clink, clink as he walked. "Leo," Julian said, his voice loud and loose, carrying the easy, unbothered confidence of a man who had just spent $300 of the company's money on a prime ribeye. He didn't look at Leo's clean desk or the empty file trays. He dropped his keys onto the greasy top of the battery charger station, where they slid into a puddle of condensation. "Good news! I just came from a meeting with the secondary underwriters at Midwest. The bank is backing off." Leo sat back in his chair. He kept his hands resting on the edge of the large black ledger. "The bank is backing off?" "Absolutely," Julian said, pulling a silver pen from his pocket and rolling it between his palms. "I showed them the draft of the new compliance protocol Marcus told me about, the forward-looking one you printed. They loved it. They said, as long as we have the signed agreement in our file for their audit review on Friday, the temporary freeze on the payroll account won't even be activated. It's a complete win." Leo looked at Julian's face. He looked at the slight, self-satisfied curve of his brother's mouth, the way his eyes crinkled with the easy victory of a salesman who believed his own pitch. In his mind, Leo ran the calculation. Midwest Underwriters was a subsidiary of Apex Commercial. In corporate banking, when an auditor identifies a material compliance failure, like a broken customs seal, they do not back off because of a draft protocol. They issue a standard 48-hour cure notice. The notice is a legal formality, a grace period designed to protect the bank from lender liability lawsuits before they execute a formal default and freeze the assets. The bank reps hadn't backed off. They had simply taken the draft protocol, thanked Julian for his cooperation, and handed the file to their legal department to draft the formal default notice. The default would hit the Vance & Sons fax machine at exactly 9 a.m. on Friday morning. Julian didn't know the difference between a win and a stay of execution. He was too lazy to read the compliance regulations and too arrogant to believe a bank would actually shut down a legacy family business over a piece of cut plastic. "Did Marcus authorize the final draft?" Leo asked, his voice low, matching the steady hum of the small desk fan. Yeah, he looked at it," Julian said, waving his hand dismissively as he reached into his pocket for his tin of mints. "He said it's fine. We'll sign the formal copy tomorrow morning when the notary comes by for the lease renewals. No rush. We've got 48 hours. 48 hours. I need the signed copy for the gate registry before the Thursday morning trucks arrive," Leo said. "The Port Authority database requires the verification scan to clear the container holds." "Don't worry about the port, Leo," Julian said, popping a mint into his mouth. The sharp smell of wintergreen briefly fought the garlic and red wine. "I called the broker's cousin again. He's got a contact in the district office who's going to run a manual bypass on the Keeler box tomorrow afternoon. It's handled." A manual bypass. There was no such thing as a manual bypass on a federal customs hold. The district office used an automated system linked directly to the Federal Maritime Database. The only way to clear the hold was for a customs officer to physically inspect the seal, verify the cargo, and enter a digital clearance key. Julian's contact was likely a clerk who had promised to look into it just to get Julian off the phone. "I'll prepare the final logs," Leo said quietly. "That's my boy," Julian said, patting the top of the black ledger book as if it were a loyal dog. "Keep the gears turning, Leo. We're almost through the woods on this one. Once the credit line is extended next week, we'll see about getting that warehouse heater fixed. Promise." He picked up his keys from the battery charger, not noticing the ring of black grease that now coated the leather fob, and walked into his inner office. The heavy door closed, and the lock clicked into place. Leo sat in the quiet of the room. He opened the black ledger book again. He didn't look at the entries. He looked at the white space on the inside of the back cover, the blank, unprinted paper where his father had written the warehouse's original square footage in pencil 30 years ago. The brothers were walking toward the cliff with their eyes closed, convinced they were flying. They had built a wall of lies, weaponized incompetence, and superficial charm, and they had lived behind it so long they had forgotten that the physical world, the world of diesel, steel, and federal law, did not care about their dinner meetings. Leo closed his pen. He slid the black ledger book into the bottom drawer of his desk, turned the brass key, and felt the lock snap shut. The countdown was down to 36 hours. The yellow legal pad lay flat on the metal desk, illuminated by the single pale beam of Leo's small desk lamp. It was Thursday, November 16th, 5:12 a.m. The air outside the window was a thick, freezing soup of river fog, so dense that the headlights of the early morning delivery trucks on the main avenue were reduced to faint, floating smears of yellow light. Inside the office, the radiator hissed like a sleeping animal, venting a dry, dusty warmth that did nothing to chase the chill from the concrete floor. Leo held his blue ballpoint pen. His fingers were stiff from the cold, but his hand did not shake. He wrote 3 lines. To the Executive Committee, Vance & Sons Distribution. Please accept this as formal notice of my resignation from the position of Logistics Coordinator, effective Friday, November 17, 2026, at 8 a.m. All terminal access keys and security codes will be left on the dispatch desk. He signed his name at the bottom, Leo Vance. He tore the yellow sheet from the pad along the perforated line. The sound of the paper tearing was sharp, like a dry twig snapping in the silence. He folded the sheet twice, slid it into a plain white envelope, and sealed the flap. He didn't write a name on the outside. He didn't need to. At 5:45 a.m., the side door of the warehouse opened with its familiar heavy clatter. Jerry, the senior night shift forklift driver and maintenance mechanic, walked in. He was a barrel-chested man of 55, wearing a grease-stained high-visibility vest over a heavy hooded sweatshirt. His face was red from the wind, his eyes watering from the fog. He carried a blue thermos under his arm and smelled of cheap tobacco and cold iron. "Morning, Leo," Jerry grunted, walking over to the rusted metal coat rack to hang up his heavy winter coat. "The starter on forklift 3 is dragging again. Took me 4 cranks to get the block warm. We need a new solenoid before the weekend rush." Leo stood up. He walked to the small break room sink, poured a cup of hot water from the kettle, and set it on the counter. "Jerry, I want you to take your rolling toolbox home in your pickup truck tonight." Jerry paused. His hand stayed on the coat hanger, his back turned to Leo. He slowly turned around, his brow furrowed in the dim light of the hallway. "My rolling box? That thing weighs 300 pounds, Leo. I just spent 2 hours last week organizing the socket drawers." "Take it home," Leo said. His voice was very quiet, but it had a flat, immovable weight to it. "Tell Marcus you need to clean the drawer slides and oil the casters over the weekend. Tell him whatever you want. Just make sure it's in the bed of your truck before you punch out at 5 tonight." Jerry stared at him. He had worked with Leo's father, and he had worked with Leo since Leo was 22. He knew that Leo didn't make casual suggestions, and he knew that Leo was the only person in the building who knew the serial number of every tool in the maintenance shed. "Is the bank coming, Leo?" Jerry asked, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly whisper. Leo didn't answer directly. He looked at the window, where the fog was slowly pressing against the glass like a damp, gray face. "If the bank freezes the facility, they change the locks within 20 minutes of the court order," Leo said. "Anything inside the gates is listed on the sheriff's inventory as corporate asset collateral. If your personal tools are in that shed, you won't get them back for 6 months, maybe never. You can't work without your tools, Jerry." Jerry's jaw tightened. He looked down at his boots, then back at Leo. He understood. His rolling snap-on set was worth $8,000, money he had spent 30 years accumulating, one paycheck at a time. It was his livelihood, his security. "What about the other guys?" Jerry asked. "The drivers? Tell them to take their personal GPS units and comfort gear out of the cabs tonight," Leo said. "Tell them we're doing a full hazardous material inspection on Friday, and the cabs have to be completely sterile. Don't say anything else." Jerry took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling under the dirty orange vest. He nodded once, a slow, heavy nod of absolute trust. "All right, Leo. We'll clean the cabs tonight. My box will be in my truck by 4. "Thank you, Jerry," Leo said. "You're a good lad, Leo," Jerry said quietly. He reached out, his rough, grease-stained hand briefly touching Leo's shoulder. "Your old man would have been proud of the way you run this floor." He knew who the real workers were. Jerry turned and walked back out onto the warehouse floor. A moment later, the deep, rattling roar of Forklift 3's diesel engine cranked over, coughing twice before settling into a loud, rhythmic vibration that shook the office walls. Leo sat back down at his desk. He made an internal calculation. By removing Jerry's rolling toolbox and the driver's personal gear, he was protecting the men who had actually kept the business alive. But he was also stripping the facility of its operational capacity. Jerry's toolbox contained the only metric tap and die set in the yard, the only heavy-duty hydraulic pressure gauges, and the specialty diagnostic scanners required to reset the safety limiters on the electric reach trucks. When those machines broke on Friday afternoon, and Forklift 3's hydraulic seal was already leaking 3 ounces of fluid an hour, the warehouse would have no way to repair them. Marcus and Julian would have to call an external industrial technician, a service that required a $500 diagnostic deposit up front. A deposit they wouldn't be able to pay because their corporate credit cards would be frozen by Midwest underwriters at 9:30 Friday morning. Leo took the white envelope containing his resignation letter and slid it into the middle drawer of his desk. He locked the drawer, pulled the key from the lock, and slid it onto his brass key ring. It was Thursday morning. The fog was beginning to lift, turning from gray to a cold, blinding white as the sun rose behind the clouds. The stage was set. The silent preparation was complete. The thin yellow light of a cold November afternoon struggled through the grime of the office window, casting a pale, ribbed shadow of the security bars across Leo's desk. On the metal surface, the paper sheets of the revised compliance protocol lay in a neat, white row. Leo used a worn wooden ruler with a chipped brass edge to align their borders, smoothing out the slight curl of the tractor feed paper with the side of his palm. The office door opened with a sudden, sharp rattle. Julian walked in, carrying a thin leather folder. He had taken off his cashmere scarf, but his wool coat was still open, flapping against his trousers as he moved. He had a look of high-spirited, almost manic triumph on his face, his eyes bright as he stopped at the corner of the desk. "Done," Julian said, tossing a signed authorization sheet onto Leo's desk. The paper slid across the metal, stopping an inch from the wooden ruler. Marcus signed it. I signed it. The board approved the language of the forward-looking protocol by digital vote at noon. Now we just need your signature on the master copy, Leo, and we can upload the PDF to the bank's portal. Leo picked up the authorization sheet. His eyes went straight to the bottom of the page where the signatures were located. Marcus's signature was large, loopy, and aggressive, his pen having torn slightly into the fiber of the cheap paper. Julian's was a quick, careless scribble that resembled a dying wave. Both were dated November 16th. Leo turned the page back to the body of the text. His thumb held the edge of Section 4, the part he had rewritten on the dot matrix printer Wednesday morning. His eyes scanned the words he had drafted. Section 4.1. In the absence of an active logistics coordinator, all physical verification, manifest execution, and legal compliance liabilities under the Port Authority regulations shall immediately and without delay revert to the Chief Operating Officer. Julian hadn't read it, or if he had, his eyes had skimmed over the phrase, in the absence of an active logistics coordinator, treating it as standard corporate boilerplate, the kind of meaningless conditional legalese that filled their carrier agreements. To Julian, Leo was as permanent a fixture of the warehouse as the steel beams of the racks. The idea of his absence was an abstract impossibility, a legal fiction that didn't require a thought. By signing this page, Julian had legally bound himself to the role of compliance officer the moment Leo's resignation took effect at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. "Is the PDF scan ready?" Leo asked. His voice was quiet, steady, carrying the flat, soothing tone of a technician performing a routine diagnostic. "The scanner's warmed up," Julian said, leaning his hip against the corner of the battery charger station, oblivious to the faint, black circle of grease that was beginning to transfer to the wool of his trousers. "Just put your name on the line, kiddo. The compliance director at Apex is waiting for the upload. Once he gets it, he'll clear the payroll account freeze before their afternoon close." Julian's personal phone buzzed on his belt. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and let out a short, annoyed sigh. The caller ID was visible in the pale afternoon light. Apex Commercial, Risk Management Department. Julian swiped the screen to silent and slid the phone back into his pocket. "They're like vultures," he muttered, shaking his head with a condescending laugh. "They call every 30 minutes to verify the protocol status. Let them wait. Once we upload the signed document, they'll have to shut their mouths and release the funds." They weren't calling to verify. They were calling to confirm the delivery of the 48-hour default warning. But Julian's defense mechanism was perfect. He treated every warning as a clerical annoyance, a sign that the bureaucrats were just doing their job. Leo reached for his blue ballpoint pen. He held it for a second, feeling the coldness of the plastic barrel against his fingers. In his mind, the final lines of the grid fell into place. If he signed this document, the bank would receive the PDF by 3 o'clock today. The compliance director would see the forward-looking language and the signatures of all three brothers, which would satisfy the immediate requirements of the cure notice. The payroll account would remain open for another 16 hours. The warehouse workers would be paid. Their Friday morning checks would clear the automated clearinghouse tonight before the bank's legal team executed the formal asset freeze at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Jerry, the drivers, and the dock boys would have their money in their personal accounts. They would be safe. And Julian, by signing Section 4.1, would be left holding the legal responsibility for the broken customs seal the moment the federal inspectors arrived at 10. Leo lowered the pen to the paper. He signed his name on the line marked Logistics Coordinator, Leo Vance. He didn't use his signature, the quick, illegible scribble. He wrote his name out in clear, neat, blocky letters, identical to the script he used to log the delivery manifests in the black register. He set the pen down. "There you go," Leo said. Julian snatched the sheet off the desk, his eyes scanning the signature block with a look of pure relief. "Beautiful. Perfect. I'll scan this right now." He tapped Leo's shoulder, a gesture of warm, superficial patronization. "You did good, Leo. Seriously. We're going to get through this, and we're going to make this company bigger than Dad ever dreamed of." "I'll prepare the Thursday evening dispatch files," Leo said. "Great, do that," Julian said, already halfway to the copy room, the paper held high in his hand like a trophy. "I'll handle the scan. We're in the clear, kid." The door to the copy room closed, and a moment later, the high-pitched, rhythmic whir, whir, whir of the flatbed scanner began. Leo sat in the pale yellow light. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his brass key ring, and detached the key to his desk drawer. He placed the key on the center of his clean desk mat, next to the wooden ruler. He had exactly 15 hours of his tenure left. The tailgates of the departing trucks had stopped rattling over the gravel yard by 5:30 p.m. Through the wire-reinforced window of the office, Leo watched Jerry's dark red Ford pickup crawl toward the main gate. In the bed of the truck, secured by two thick orange ratcheting straps, the massive steel cabinet of Jerry's rolling toolbox sat under a blue plastic tarp, its chrome handles catching the cold, wet reflection of the street lamp. Jerry didn't honk. He didn't wave. He just paused at the gate, tapped his brakes twice, a red flash in the thick evening mist, and rolled out onto the empty avenue. The warehouse was dead. Leo walked the concrete floor, his boots making a dry, echoing scuff on the cold concrete. He stopped at the heavy gray metal door of the main electrical breaker panel. The steel was cold, smelling of old grease and dry copper. He opened the latch and reached for the heavy black toggle that controlled the auxiliary yard floodlights. He pulled it down. Clack. A sharp, blue-white spark flashed behind the safety glass of the panel, and the distant, buzzing drone of the halogen lamps outside died instantly, plunging the yard into the gray, soft dark of the November night. He walked back into the office. Marcus was standing by his desk, sliding his laptop into a tan leather briefcase with brass latches. He had a smug, relaxed look on his face, his tie removed and stuffed into his pocket, his top collar button undone. The success of the PDF upload had washed away his morning panic. He was once again the executive, the leader of men, the master of his domain. "Leo," Marcus said, not looking up as he zipped the briefcase. "I'm heading out. Julian's already at the athletic club. We've got some prospective carriers to meet for drinks. Make sure the dispatch files for tomorrow morning are printed and on the desk by 7. We've got a busy Friday." "The files are already printed," Leo said. He was standing near the coat rack, his canvas jacket zipped to his throat, his hands resting in his pockets. "Good. Great," Marcus said, finally looking up. His eyes didn't settle on Leo's face. They flicked to the clean, empty surface of Leo's desk, then to the closed ledger book. "Oh, and before you lock up tonight, run into my office and empty the wastebasket. I had some deli sandwiches in there from lunch, and I don't want the place smelling like old onions when the bank reps do their final walkthrough tomorrow." He picked up his briefcase, gave Leo a brief, dismissive nod, and walked out the door. The glass door clicked shut, and a moment later, the deep, civilized purr of Marcus's Mercedes started up in the lot, its headlights sweeping across the dark office walls before fading into the fog. Leo stood in the quiet of the room, listening to the slow, heavy tick, tick, tick of the clock on the wall. He made an internal calculation. He could leave the wastebasket. It was a petty command, a final, small act of dominance from a brother who treated him like an errand boy. But the energy required to ignore it was the same as the energy required to execute it, and Marcus's office was where the corporate trash was kept. Leo walked into Marcus's office. The room smelled of expensive leather, stale coffee, and the sharp vinegar tang of the mustard from his sandwich wrapper. Leo picked up the small, walnut veneer wastebasket. He reached in with his gloved hand to pull out the plastic liner. At the very bottom of the bin, beneath the crumpled, grease-proof paper of the sandwich wrappers, lay a single, glossy card printed on heavy, cream-colored stock. Leo pulled it out. It was an automated reservation confirmation from the Capitol Grill, the most expensive steakhouse in the downtown financial district. Reservation for Marcus Vance. Party size, 2 guests. Date, Friday, November 17th. Time, 6 p.m. Note, quiet table requested for corporate celebration. 2 guests, Marcus and Julian. Leo looked at the cream-colored card. The reservation was set for 6 o'clock on Friday, exactly 2 hours after the time listed on the confidential board memo for Leo's immediate termination for gross misconduct. They hadn't just planned his firing, they had booked the victory dinner. They were going to strip him of his livelihood, hand him his papers, lock the facility gates, and then drive downtown to toast their successful restructuring with $50 stakes paid for by the company's operating account. Leo didn't feel his chest tighten. He didn't clench his jaw. He felt only the cold, hard satisfaction of a mechanic who had just found the exact source of an engine knock. The brothers had written their own script, but they had forgotten that Leo was the one who controlled the stage. He dropped the cream card back into the plastic liner, pulled the bag from the bin, and tied the neck with a tight double knot. He carried the bag out to the large green dumpster at the edge of the gravel lot. He tossed it inside, the heavy lid clanging shut with a dull, hollow, metallic thud that died in the freezing fog. He walked back to his truck. He didn't look back at the dark warehouse. He didn't look at the corporate sign with their father's name fading under the rust. It was Thursday night. The preparation was complete. Tomorrow was Friday. The frost on the warehouse steps didn't melt. It broke under his boots with a sound like crushed sugar. It was Friday, November 17th, 7:30 a.m. Leo stood in the middle of his empty office, his canvas backpack slung over his right shoulder. The desk was completely sterile. The old hole puncher, the rusted stapler, and the small green blotter were gone, packed into the bottom of his locker the night before. All that remained on the gray steel surface was his brass keyring, resting exactly in the center of the desk. One by one, Leo detached the keys. Clink, the master key to the warehouse gates. Clink, the key to the chemical cage. Clink, the key to the office deadbolt. He arranged the 3 brass keys in a neat, perfect triangle next to the white envelope. The envelope had no name on it, only the flat, clean white of the paper catching the blue light of the winter dawn. At 7:50 a.m., the glass door rattled. Julian walked in, holding a cardboard tray with 2 large paper coffee cups. He had his camel hair overcoat on, his hair perfectly combed, but his eyes were bloodshot from the night before, and he smelled faintly of stale gin and peppermint. He looked at Leo, then at the backpack on Leo's shoulder, and his brow furrowed with a slight, irritated twitch. "Leo," Julian said, setting the coffee tray down on the battery charger station. "Why aren't the dispatch files on my desk? The first flatbed for the regional distributor is already idling at the gate." Leo didn't answer. He pointed his finger down toward the white envelope on the desk. Julian looked at the envelope. He set his leather folder down, reached out, and picked up the paper. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at Leo's face, searching for the usual silent obedience, but found only the flat, empty gray of Leo's eyes. Julian tore the envelope open. As his eyes scanned the 3 short lines of the resignation letter, the flush of his morning coffee faded from his cheeks, leaving his skin a pale, muddy yellow. His mouth opened slightly, his tongue running over his lower lip, as if he were trying to find the words to a script he had forgotten. "What is this?" Julian asked. His voice was quiet, but it had a sharp, vibrating edge to it. "Is this a joke, Leo? A strike? If you want a raise, we can discuss the quarterly adjustments in December. You don't dump a letter like this on the desk on a Friday morning." "It's not a strike," Leo said. His voice was calm, steady, carrying the slow, rhythmic quality of the radiator hiss in the background. "My resignation is effective at 8 o'clock, in 8 minutes." Julian took a step forward, his camel hair coat swinging. The smooth, charming salesman was gone. His face was tight with an ugly, defensive panic. "You can't quit today, Leo. We have 40 tons of copper to move by noon. The bank reps are doing their final walkthrough at 10. If you're not here to verify the manifests, the compliance audit fails." "The compliance protocol is signed," Leo said. "Section 4.1 is active." Julian froze. The name of the section hung in the cold air of the room like a physical weight. Julian's eyes darted to the copy room door, then back to Leo's face, a sudden, horrifying realization dawning behind his bloodshot eyes. He hadn't read the clause. He had signed it because he was too lazy, too hungover, and too arrogant to think his youngest brother could write a legal trap. "You," Julian whispered, his fingers curling into the edge of the blue paper, crumpling the clean white stalk. "You set this up. You altered the protocol." "You signed it," Leo said. "Marcus signed it. The board approved the language at noon yesterday." Julian's face went dark, the blood rushing back to his head in a wave of hot, suffocating rage. He dropped his folder, took another step forward, his hand rising to point a finger directly at Leo's chest. "You think you're smart, Leo?" Julian snarled, his voice rising, cracking with the raw, ugly anger of a man who had been caught in his own net. "You think you can just walk out of here and leave us with the mess? We made you. You're nothing without this company. You're a high school graduate with grease under your fingernails. We were going to fire your useless ass this afternoon anyway." There it was. The final line had been crossed. The target had stepped completely into the clearing. Julian's hand was shaking as he pointed his finger. "We've got the board memo ready. We're going to tell the bank. We're going to tell the regional distributors. We're going to tell the state registry that you cut the customs seal. We'll blackball you from every logistics yard in the Midwest. You'll never work a forklift again, you little bastard." Leo looked at the finger pointing at his chest. He didn't move. He didn't raise his hands. His heart rate didn't change by a single beat. He felt only the profound, freezing silence of a man who had already stepped out of the house before the roof collapsed. "The gate log shows you locked the manifest at 8:45 on Tuesday," Leo said, his voice dropping into a register so quiet it was almost a whisper. "The port director has the registered envelope with the physical photos of the cut seal. They'll be here at 10, Julian. You're the compliance officer now." Julian's finger froze in midair. He stared at Leo, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The word port director seemed to drain the remaining air from his lungs, leaving him standing in the middle of the room, small, shivering, and completely exposed under the pale yellow light of the winter morning. Leo reached down, picked up his canvas backpack from the floor, and swung it over his shoulder. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look at the small triangle of brass keys on the desk. He walked past Julian, his shoulder brushing against the camel hair coat, and opened the glass door. As he stepped out onto the concrete corridor, the heavy deadbolt of the door swung shut behind him with a hollow, final click. Outside, the first semi-truck of the morning was idling at the gate, its air brakes letting out a long, loud hiss of frustration as the driver waited for the gate code that would never come. The vinyl booth of the diner at the corner of the industrial park smelled of stale grease, commercial glass cleaner, and the faint, sweet residue of maple syrup. Leo sat by the window. The glass was cool against his shoulder, misted with a thin layer of condensation from the heavy industrial dishwashers in the back. Outside, the fog had begun to lift, revealing the gray, flat outlines of the distant container cranes at the port, 3 miles away, their steel arms silhouetted against the white November sky like silent monuments. A waitress with a faded green apron set a thick, white ceramic plate in front of him. "More coffee, hun?" she asked, her voice flat, carrying the dry, gravelly fatigue of a 6-hour shift. "No, thank you," Leo said. He picked up his fork. The physical routine of his breakfast was slow, deliberate, and quiet. He sliced the runny yolk of his fried egg, watching the thick yellow liquid spread across the white ceramic, absorbing the salt he had shaken from the glass shaker. He used a dull, heavy knife to spread butter on a piece of toasted rye bread. He ate in silence, savoring the dry, solid crunch of the crust. Next to his plate, his personal mobile phone sat on the Formica tabletop. At 8:14 a.m., the screen lit up with a silent blue glow. It was Marcus. The screen blinked, went dark, and then lit up again immediately. Marcus, 3. Leo did not touch the phone. He took a slow sip of his black coffee, the heavy ceramic mug warming his hand. He looked out the window. From this intersection, he could see the main avenue that led to the Vance & Sons gate. At 8:25 a.m., a second blue and white semi-truck turned onto the avenue, its trailer tires squealing softly on the wet asphalt. It slowed down, its brake lights glowing red, and came to a stop 50 yards behind the Kenworth that was still blocked at the main entrance. The bottleneck was beginning. Without the morning operational routing keys, which Leo kept in his head and had deleted from the terminal memory before he locked his desk, the electronic gate scale could not verify the weight of the incoming loads. The gate arms would remain down, and the automated scalehouse computer would show a red flashing indicator, inbound lockout, coordinator validation required. At 8:42 a.m., the phone vibrated on the table, a short, dry buzz that rattled the sugar caddy. It was a text message from Jerry. "Toolbox is in my garage. Safe. The yard is a parking lot, Leo." 3 more trucks just lined up on the shoulder of the county road. Marcus is out there in his shiny shoes trying to read the manifest barcodes with his personal phone. The drivers are laughing at him. 2 of the dock boys just walked to their cars and left. Leo read the text. He didn't reply. He deleted the message, slid the phone back into his pocket, and went back to his toast. He made an internal calculation. By 9:30, the line of idling trucks on the avenue would grow to 10. The county sheriff's department would receive their first automated traffic complaint from the neighboring warehouse, a chemical distribution plant whose tank trucks wouldn't be able to turn into their own driveway. At 9:45, the regional risk assessment team from Apex Commercial would arrive to perform their final physical walkthrough before the credit line extension was officially denied or cleared. They would find the main gate blocked by 500 tons of idling diesel freight, the CEO screaming at a truck driver on the gravel, and the dock completely empty of operational personnel. And at 10 o'clock, the registered Tyvek envelope Leo had sent yesterday would be logged by the Port Director's Compliance Division. The federal field agents would get into their government sedans. They had exactly 45 minutes of quiet left. The phone in his pocket buzzed again, a continuous, heavy vibration. Leo pulled it out. The caller ID showed the corporate landline, the red phone on the corner of the dispatch desk that had once been his father's. He let it ring. He watched the screen until the call went to voicemail. Then he tapped the screen, set his profile to Do Not Disturb, and laid the phone face down on the table. He picked up a clean paper napkin, wiped his fingers, and reached into his pocket for his wallet. He pulled out a $10 bill, the paper crisp and dry, and laid it on the formica next to his empty plate. He stood up, slung his canvas backpack over his shoulder, and zipped his jacket to his throat. As he walked out of the diner, the heavy glass door let out a soft, pneumatic hiss, closing behind him with a quiet click that was swallowed by the rumble of the highway traffic in the distance. He walked to his truck, got in, and started the engine, his headlights cutting through the pale, lifting mist of the morning. He didn't drive toward the warehouse. He turned the truck south, toward the highway ramp that led to the city center, where Atlas Logistics had their corporate headquarters on the 10th floor of the new glass tower. The 10th floor conference room of Atlas Logistics was so silent that the only sound was the soft, pressurized shh of the climate control system. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, the harbor lay stretched out like a blue-gray map, the massive container ships looking like small, brightly colored blocks of plastic as they queued near the channel. The air in the room was warm, tasting of expensive filtration and the rich, dark aroma of espresso from the polished chrome machine in the corner. Leo sat at the long table of black walnut. His hands, still stained with dark grease around the cuticles, rested on a heavy linen paper folder. Across from him sat Robert Davies, the vice president of supply chain for Atlas. Robert was a quiet man in his late 50s, wearing a charcoal wool suit that actually fit him. He had known Leo's father 20 years ago, back when the distribution industry was run by men who knew how to pack a pallet. "Frank Mitchell called me this morning at 8:15, Robert said, his voice a low, measured baritone that didn't need to rise to fill the room. "He told me he's moving the entire Mitchell Foundry contract to our regional terminal. He also told me that if we wanted his 40 tons a week, we had to hire you to run the gate operations." Leo didn't speak. He reached down, opened his canvas backpack, and pulled out his father's old brass caliper. He laid it carefully on the black walnut table next to his new, unblemished leather notepad. "The Mitchell account requires specialized temperature control logs for the copper-nickel alloys," Leo said quietly. "Your current terminal platform doesn't have the custom manifest fields for the heat-run serial numbers. I can program the override codes into your gate database by Monday morning." Robert looked at the brass caliper, then at Leo's face. A small, dry smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. "You're your father's son, Leo. You don't talk about the macro picture. You talk about the heat-run numbers." He pushed a blue and white folder across the table. "This is our standard director's contract. We're offering 30% above your previous draw, full medical, and a dedicated logistics clerk to handle the morning filing. You won't have to sweep the bays." Leo picked up his pen. Using his neat, blocky draftsman's script, he signed his name on the bottom of the linen page. Leo Vance, Director of Regional Operations. At exactly 10:14 a.m., the phone in his jacket pocket began to vibrate. It was a heavy, continuous buzz that rattled against the wool of his coat. Leo didn't pull it out immediately. He looked at Robert. "It's Marcus," Leo said. "I should take this." "Put it on speaker, Leo," Robert said, his eyes turning to the glass wall. "Let's see how the old yard is handling the transition." Leo pulled the phone from his pocket, tapped the screen, and set it in the middle of the black walnut table. Instantly, the quiet of the conference room was shattered by a frantic, high-pitched screaming, backed by the deep, rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a semi-truck trying to back up in a crowded space, and the distant, echoing blare of a police siren. "Leo!" Marcus's voice was hoarse, cracking with a dry, terrified panic. "Leo, where the hell are you? The gate scale is locked down. We've got 12 trucks backed up onto the state route, and the county sheriff is here writing us a civil citation for blocking the intersection. Where are the emergency bypass codes? Leo looked at the phone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. The emergency codes are linked to the coordinator's signature terminal, Marcus. I deleted the terminal access when my resignation took effect at 8. You can't do this, Marcus shrieked, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The bank reps from Apex are here, Leo. They're standing in the office. They just saw the Scale House lockout and they're refusing to authorize the payroll draw. They're talking about default. They're saying we don't have operational control. In the background of the call, a loud, heavy bang rattled through the receiver. The sound of the office glass door being pushed open with violent force. "Who's in charge here?" A new voice boomed through the speaker, cold, dry, and carrying the flat, unmistakable authority of a federal agent. "We're with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Field Operations. We have a warrant for physical verification of container KL9082. Where is the compliance coordinator?" A long, suffocating silence fell over the line, broken only by the sound of Julian hyperventilating in the background. He's not here." Marcus's voice was barely a whisper now, the panic turning into a cold, hollow dread. "Our coordinator resigned this morning, but we have the new compliance protocol. We uploaded it to the bank yesterday." "We have the protocol right here, Mr. Vance," the federal agent's voice said, the paper rustling against the phone receiver. "According to Section 4.1 of the document signed by you and your COO, Julian Vance, in the absence of the coordinator, all physical and legal liabilities for the customs seals revert immediately to the Chief Operating Officer. That's you, Julian." A sharp, choking gasp came from Julian. "No, wait, that was a typo. Leo wrote that. Leo's the one who handles the doc." "Your signature is on the page, Mr. Vance," the agent said, "and the seal on container KL9082 has been cut without a digital customs release. Under Section 1592 of the Tariff Act, that is a Class 1 felony. We're going to need you to step outside to the government vehicle, sir." "Marcus," Julian's voice rose into a terrified, high-pitched wail that was abruptly cut off by the sound of heavy boots on the linoleum. "Marcus, call the lawyer! Call the—" "Leo!" Marcus screamed into the phone, his voice cracking completely, tears clearly running down his face. "Leo, please, just tell them it was you. Tell them you cut the seal. We'll pay you, Leo. We'll give you whatever you want. We'll give you 10% of the company. Just tell them you did it." Leo reached out his hand. His fingers were steady, cold, and clean. "I don't work for Vance & Sons, Marcus," Leo said. "I'm the Director of Operations for Atlas Logistics." He tapped the screen. The call disconnected, and the silence of the 10th floor conference room returned, deep, clean, and complete. Robert Davies looked at the phone, then at the black walnut table, and finally at Leo. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small magnetic security card, the one that opened the executive elevator, and slid it across the table, where it stopped next to his father's brass caliper. "Welcome to Atlas, Leo," Robert said. The silent digital clock in the corner of his new Atlas Logistics computer terminal clicked to 1600. Friday, November 17th, 4 p.m. Leo sat in his ergonomic chair, his back supported by a firm mesh frame that didn't creak when he shifted his weight. The desk was made of clean, blonde maple, smooth and entirely free of the greasy chemical film that had coated every surface in the old warehouse. Through the wide, clean window of his new office, the afternoon light was turning a cold slate gray as the rain began to fall in long, silent streaks over the harbor. He reached down and slid his hand into the top drawer of the desk, He had placed his father's old brass caliper on a small, dark blue velvet tray he had bought at the stationer's down the street. Next to it lay his black notebook, its cover dry and clean, the vinyl binding no longer smelling of diesel exhaust. His personal phone, sitting quietly on a leather coaster beside his keyboard, buzzed once. It was a text from Jerry. Locks are changed. A company called Hardin and Associates, bank receivers, showed up with 2 sheriff's deputies at 3:30. They padlocked the main gate and put a chain through the office doors. Marcus wouldn't leave his desk. They had to threaten him with trespass before he came out. He was carrying his laptop in a plastic grocery bag because he couldn't find his briefcase key. The dock crew all got their direct deposits at 3. Every single one of our checks cleared, Leo. We're safe, thanks. Leo read the message once. He didn't smile. He didn't feel a rush of triumph. He felt only the cold, physical satisfaction of a valve closing, of a pipe sealing, of a long-delayed pressure finally dropping to 0. He deleted the text, slid the phone into his drawer next to the velvet tray, and slid the drawer shut with a soft, magnetic click. The screen of his computer terminal chimed with an incoming email notification. The sender was Hardin and Associates, Corporate Receivership Division. Dear Mr. Vance, this office has been appointed by Apex Commercial Bank to oversee the emergency receivership and asset liquidation of Vance & Sons Distribution, effective immediately. We are currently facing a critical operational failure at the facility terminal. The scalehouse gate system is locked in an inbound lockout status, and the terminal scale data is inaccessible due to missing administrative security keys. We understand you were the sole operator of this platform. We are prepared to offer you an emergency consulting contract of $150 per hour with an 8-hour minimum guarantee to physically return to the site this weekend and restore the database access so we can clear the blocked public roadway. Leo read the email. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes tracing the red navigation lights of a container ship as it moved slowly past the harbor breakwater. He made an internal calculation. If he refused to help the receivers, the road blockage would continue through the weekend, resulting in massive municipal fines against the remaining corporate estate of Vance & Sons. The liquidation value of the company's physical assets, the trucks, the racks, the land, would be severely eroded by the penalties. If he accepted the consulting contract, he would return to the yard as an independent contractor, backed by the authority of the bank's receivers. He would be the one who unlocked the gates, the one who cleared the system, and the one who handed the keys to the liquidators. He would oversee the physical dismantling of his brother's empire. And Atlas Logistics, through Robert Davies, was already preparing a quiet, low-ball bid to purchase the Vance & Sons real estate and warehousing license at the upcoming bankruptcy auction on Wednesday. By unlocking the scalehouse today, he was simply grease on the wheels of Atlas's acquisition. He leaned forward, his fingers hovering over his clean, black keyboard. He typed his reply. To Hardin and Associates. From Leo Vance, Director of Regional Operations, Atlas Logistics. I am available to assist with the system restoration on Saturday morning at 8 a.m. My consulting fee is $250 per hour, payable by certified corporate draft upon arrival. Additionally, as a condition of my temporary services, your office must sign a formal waiver releasing the warehouse operational crew from any post-liquidation liability regarding the customs seal discrepancy on container KL9082. Please have the draft and the waiver ready at the gate. L. Vance. He pressed the send key. The email vanished into the server with a quiet digital zip. Leo stood up, He walked to the coat rack, took his clean, dry wool overcoat, and slid his arms into the sleeves. He picked up his canvas backpack. He looked at his desk one last time. The maple surface was perfect. The terminal screen was dark. The brass caliper was safe in its velvet drawer. At 4 p.m., he had been scheduled to be fired, to be escorted to the gate by a security guard, and to have his name dragged through the mud to save his brother's bonuses. Instead, he was leaving the tallest building in the city as a director, while his brothers were sitting in the dark of their respective apartments, waiting for the phone to ring with the news of their indictments. He walked out of the office, the thick carpet swallowing the sound of his steps, the glass doors sliding open silently to let him through. The padlocks hanging from the main gates of Vance & Sons were wrapped in thin, frozen skins of morning condensation. It was Saturday, November 18th, 7:52 a.m. The river fog was thicker than it had been on Friday, a cold, heavy gray blanket that muffled the sounds of the highway, turning the entire industrial park into a silent, damp tomb. Yellow plastic tape bearing the words, "Secured by court order, property of reserved," was wrapped around the rusted steel posts, fluttering listlessly in the freezing draft. Leo parked his old pickup truck near the curb. He didn't turn off the engine immediately. He sat in the warmth of the cab, watching the two figures standing near the locked entrance. One was Mr. Geller, the receiver from Hardin & Associates, wearing a dark trench coat that looked damp at the shoulders. The other was a county sheriff's deputy, standing with his hands tucked into his heavy-duty belt, his breath coming in white, rhythmic puffs of steam. Leo turned off the ignition, picked up his small tool bag, and stepped out into the freezing air. His boots crunched softly on the wet gravel. "Mr. Vance," Geller said as Leo approached. He didn't offer his hand. His face was gray, lined with the exhaustion of a man who had spent the last 24 hours dealing with bankrupt executives and angry creditors. "You're on time." "It's 8 o'clock, Leo said. Geller reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a long cream-colored envelope. He handed it to Leo. The certified draft for $2,000 drawn on the receivership account, and the signed liability waiver for the warehouse dock crew. My legal counsel reviewed it last night. It's fully executed. Leo opened the envelope. He pulled out the draft first, checking the figures with his slow, clinical gaze. $2,000. Then he unfolded the waiver. His eyes went directly to the signature block, verifying the receiver's corporate stamp and the legal seal. Everything was in order. Jerry and the dock boys were legally insulated from the customs violation. Their livelihoods were safe. He folded the papers, slid them into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket, and nodded. "Let's open the scale house." Geller used a heavy brass key to unlock the chain on the side gate. The chain fell away with a sharp, heavy clink-clack that sounded incredibly loud in the silent yard. They walked to the small, wood-shingled scale house at the edge of the scale platform. The building was tiny, no larger than a security booth, smelling of cold dust, mouse droppings, and the stale tobacco of the yard drivers who had stood there to sign their weight tickets. Leo stepped inside. The air was freezing, the windows frosted over with a thick white pattern. He walked to the old CRT monitor on the wooden shelf. He reached behind the plastic casing and flipped the rocker switch. The screen didn't come alive instantly. It let out a sharp, high-pitched, rising whistle, the sound of the old transformers charging up before a single green horizontal line slowly faded into focus across the dusty glass. Terminal lockout. Database inaccessible. Enter administrator validation key. Leo sat on the high wooden stool, His fingers, stiff from the cold, settled over the mechanical keys of the dirty keyboard. The keys felt familiar, the worn plastic of the enter key smooth under his thumb. "Your brother Marcus was here at 6:30 this morning," Geller said quietly, leaning against the doorframe, his collar pulled up against the draft. He looked like he'd been sleeping in his Mercedes. He kept asking if we'd found his personal ledger in the office. He said there were some personal accounts he needed to reconcile. Leo didn't look up from the screen. "There is no personal ledger. Everything is in the terminal database." "The deputy had to threaten him with arrest before he drove off," Geller said, shaking his head. "He kept saying you'd stolen his keys." Leo began to type. Vance _admin master _99. The terminal let out a short, sharp beep, and the green line split into several columns of text. "Bypass protocol active. Warning. Executing this bypass will permanently archive all pending customs compliance anomalies and transmit the active compliance director's signature block to the Federal Maritime Portal. Proceed?" Leo stared at the green text. The active compliance director currently registered in the system was Julian Vance, under Section 4.1 of the protocol they had signed on Thursday afternoon. If Leo pressed Y, the Scalehouse database would unlock, the gate arm would rise, and the backed-up trucks would be able to clear the yard. But the system would also automatically transmit the final encrypted compliance report to the Federal Port Authority, proving that Julian was the sole legal officer responsible for the cut customs seal during the violation window. It was the final, absolute execution of the trap. Julia's defense, his claim that he was just the sales guy and that Leo was the one who ran the dock, would be legally demolished by his own signed digital protocol, locked into the federal database by Leo's administrative override. Leo did not hesitate. He reached out his index finger. He pressed the Y key. Click. Then he pressed Enter. Processing. Gate scale unlocked. Federal Compliance Archive complete. Code 204-OK. Outside, the heavy pneumatic hum of the gate arm's motor began to rumble. With a slow creaking sound, the long wooden barrier rose into the gray morning air. The first semi-truck in the distance let out a loud, victorious blast of its air horn, its heavy tires beginning to roll over the steel scale platform. Leo stood up. He picked up his tool bag. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his personal brass keyring, and detached the key to the scale house. He laid the key on the wooden shelf right next to the dusty keyboard. "The system is running," Leo said to Geller. "The database is unlocked. Hardin and Associates has full operational control." Geller looked at the screen, then at the keys on the shelf, and finally at Leo's face. There was a look of deep, silent respect in the receiver's eyes. He knew that Leo had just handed him the keys to the kingdom, while simultaneously delivering the final, quiet execution of his brothers. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," Geller said. "We'll take it from here." Leo stepped out of the scale house. He walked down the wooden steps, his boots crunching on the wet gravel as he made his way back to his truck. He didn't look back at the warehouse. He didn't look at the yellow police tape fluttering on the fence. He got into his truck, started the engine, and turned the heater on. As the truck rolled out through the main gate, he looked in his rearview mirror. The corporate sign of Vance & Sons Distribution, their father's legacy, which Marcus and Julian had used as their personal gold mine, was slowly disappearing into the thick, freezing gray of the Saturday morning fog. The silent, pressurized warmth of the 10th floor office at Atlas Logistics made the cold rain outside the window seem like a distant black and white film. It was Monday, November 20th, 7:15 a.m. Leo sat at his new blonde maple desk. He held a small, yellow microfiber cloth slowly polishing the brass jaw of his father's old caliper. He rubbed the metal in tiny circular motions, removing a faint fingerprint from the vernier scale until the century-old brass caught the clean, soft glow of his desktop lamp. He laid the tool back into its velvet-lined tray, right next to a neat row of 6 identical black gel pens he had aligned against the drawer divider. The silence of the room was broken only by the premium, heavy shh, shh of his desktop laser printer, which was quietly outputting the new regional routing schedules on clean, 80-pound white paper. At 7:45 a.m., the door to his office opened with a soft, magnetic sigh. Robert Davies walked in, carrying a large porcelain mug of coffee and a folded copy of the Midwest Business Chronicle. He was wearing his usual charcoal suit, but he looked relaxed, his collar unbuttoned by a single notch, his steps light on the thick gray carpet. "Good morning, Leo," Robert said, setting the folded newspaper down on the corner of the desk, just outside the boundary of Leo's leather desk mat. "Your first official week. How is the database migration?" "The Mitchell Foundry files are fully integrated," Leo said. His voice was quiet, steady, carrying the calm, mechanical rhythm of the printer beside him. The first flatbed of copper-nickel alloy cleared the Atlas gate scale at 6:45 this morning. The electronic transit ticket was sent to Frank's dispatch desk within 30 seconds. Robert nodded, taking a slow sip of his coffee. He tapped the folded newspaper with his index finger. "The industry news moves fast on a Monday morning. Have you seen the Chronicle?" Leo looked at the newspaper. He didn't pick it up. He simply looked at the front page of the Metro and Business section, where a small 2-column headline was printed on page 4. "Vance & Sons operations halted amid federal customs inquiry. Executive detained." The federal judge denied Julian's motion for a reduced signature bond over the weekend, Robert said, his voice flat, devoid of any drama or false pity. "Because the primary operating accounts at Apex Commercial were frozen by the receivership, the corporation couldn't secure the $250,000 collateral requirement. Julian is currently in the federal holding facility downtown, waiting for his formal arraignment on Thursday." Leo stared at the black print of the headline. He didn't freeze. His chest didn't tighten. He felt only the cold, dry clarity of an engineer looking at a stress test report. Julian, who had spent his life buying lunch for port directors and writing loopy, arrogant memos, was now sitting in a concrete cell, learning the physical reality of federal maritime law. And Marcus, who had spent his weekend trying to sneak past a sheriff's deputy to find his personal ledger, was currently facing 3 separate breach of contract lawsuits from the regional freight brokers whose trucks had been blocked at the gate. "They're liquidated, Leo," Robert said, leaning his hip against the corner of the low filing cabinet. "The bank receivers are putting the Vance & Sons real estate and the warehouse license on the auction block at 10:30 on Wednesday. I've already authorized our legal team to place an initial bid of $2.2 million. $2.2 million. It was less than 40% of the valuation Marcus had claimed to the bank just 3 days ago. But with a padlocked gate, a frozen credit line, and a federal customs seal indictment hanging over the operating license, the Vance & Sons facility was nothing more than a pile of cold steel and concrete. Leo made an internal calculation. With Vance & Sons liquidated and Julian in federal custody, there were 6 mid-sized metal distributors in the industrial park who would find themselves without a logistics provider on Monday morning. They were loyal to his father's old name, but they couldn't risk their own supply chains on a shuttered yard. If he sent them customized onboarding invitations with a 5% volume discount under the Atlas Logistics banner by noon today, they would migrate their contracts before the close of business on Tuesday. By the time Atlas purchased the physical warehouse at the Wednesday auction, 95% of the old Vance & Sons client base would already be registered under Leo's new Atlas division. The brothers would be left with nothing but their debts, their lawyers' bills, and the memory of the youngest brother who had spent 10 years sweeping the floors they thought they owned. "I have the contact files for the remaining distributors," Leo said quietly, his hand resting on the smooth, cold wood of his desk drawer. "I'll draft the onboarding emails before lunch." "Good," Robert said. He picked up his coffee mug, gave Leo a brief, solid nod of respect, and walked toward the door. "Let's keep the transition clean, Leo. Your father would have liked the way we're doing this. No noise, just the work." The door closed behind him with a soft, secure click, returning the room to its warm, pressurized silence. Leo pulled the white sheets of the routing schedule from the printer tray. The paper was warm, smelling of clean toner and fresh wood pulp. He aligned the borders with his wooden ruler, placed them into a clean manila folder, and opened his terminal. His fingers, completely clean of grease, began to move across the mechanical keys, the steady rhythmic clack, 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 filling the silent room like the ticking of a perfect, unstoppable clock. The gray twilight of Monday evening had completely settled over the harbor, turning the vast expanse of water into a sheet of polished charcoal. From his office on the 10th floor, Leo watched the yellow and red lights of the container terminals flicker on, casting long, fractured reflections across the wet docks. The office was quiet, the silent climate control venting a clean, dry warmth that carried the faint scent of the new leather desk mat. At 5:15 p.m., a soft chime announced the arrival of the executive elevator. A young courier in a dark blue uniform walked down the carpeted corridor, holding a heavy black metal security box with a tarnished brass handle. He stopped at the entrance to Leo's office, giving a polite, quiet knock on the glass. "Mr. Leo Vance?" the courier asked. "Yes," Leo said, not moving from his chair. This was recovered from the primary wall safe at the Vance & Sons facility during the receivership inventory this afternoon, the courier said, stepping forward to place the heavy box on the edge of the maple desk. "The bank's legal representative, Mr. Geller, instructed us to deliver it directly to you. He said your father's name was engraved on the lock plate." Leo looked at the box. The black paint was chipped at the corners, revealing the dark gray steel beneath. On the brass lock plate, the initials E.V., Edward Vance, were engraved in a simple, fading cursive. "Thank you," Leo said. The courier nodded, offered a digital tablet for Leo's signature, and slipped silently back toward the elevator. Leo reached into his pocket. He pulled out his brass keyring, selecting the smallest, oldest key, the one his father had handed him on his 21st birthday, when the older brothers were already in their executive suites. He slid the key into the tarnished lock. Click. The brass tumbler turned with a smooth, heavy resistance. Leo lifted the metal lid. There was no cash inside. There were no stock certificates or corporate deeds. Resting at the bottom of the box was a single, small notebook with a black fabric cover, its pages yellowed at the edges, smelling of cedar oil and old paper. Leo opened the book to the very first page. Written in his father's heavy, precise draftsman's hand, dated 15 years ago, was a short entry. To Leo, the yard does not belong to the ones who sign the leases or the ones who wear the suits. It belongs to the one who knows how the gears turn, the one who stays when the lights go out, and the one who keeps the scale honest. I built this place for a worker. It was always meant for you. Keep your head down, keep your silence, and let the weight of their own shortcuts do the work. Leo slowly closed the book. He didn't let out a sigh, He didn't feel a sudden rush of warmth. He felt only the deep, freezing clarity of a circle finally closing, of a weight perfectly balanced. His father had known. The silence had never been a surrender. It was the quiet, patient gathering of a debt that the universe had now settled in full. He placed the yellowed notebook into his canvas backpack, wrapping it in the soft flannel shirt next to the brass caliper. He slid his arms into his wool coat, picked up his bag, and turned off the desk lamp. The glass doors of the Atlas suite closed behind him with a soft, magnetic whisper. Sometimes, the truth does not need to shout to be heard. It only needs to wait. Some call it patience, some call it strategy. Here, we call it the quiet, inevitable weight of consequence. If you found a deep, satisfying justice in how the scales finally balanced for Leo, we invite you to join our circle of listeners. Subscribe to Crazy Karma Stories, turn on your notifications, and leave a comment below with your thoughts on Leo's silent victory. In this world, the loudest voices rarely carry the day, and the truth always finds its way home. Thank you for listening to Crazy Karma Stories. Until our next story, keep your path quiet and let the scales do the work.